Hey everyone, Grayson here with another live stream. Today we have Danny from PhilTalk. I first met Danny just the other day on Praise I Am's stream. Danny kind of came on. I was the only atheist in the stream, and Danny came on. We had a great discussion there. So I thought he added a lot of great points. We kind of went back and forth on email, and I watched some of his previous discussions, and I saw that he had a lot of points that I thought were, or positions rather, that I thought were very, very interesting. I hadn't met anyone before with positions quite like Danny's, so I thought, if he was open to it, I would have him on for sort of an informal discussion where he talks about some of these positions, and I try to understand where he's coming from. So, just as a general roadmap, then I can hand it over to Danny to introduce himself, see if there's anything he wants to say. But what got me the most interested was this concept of dualism, or of like naturalism versus more of a dualistic framework that Danny would be coming from. So that's what I was really most interested in. And then he mentioned that he's a little bit, let's say, notorious for some of his stances on natural selection. So I thought we could get into both of those topics tonight in this discussion. So Danny, is there anything that you want to say or add to that?
No, you exposed me talking. I usually refrain from talking to people like the likes of Jill, but you've exposed me, and I don't know if I can forgive you. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, we met on Praise I Am stream, which is an unlikely place for the two of us to meet, and yeah, but I'm a pleasure meeting you, Grayson. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, perfect. It's great to be here actually, because most of the time, like the people that I have on here are creationists, and we get into heated, more adversarial discussion. So for
Mhm.
tonight, I really wanted to keep it as more of like a discussion among peers, since like we are both atheistic. I'm pretty sure
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the difference is that I would consider myself to be a naturalist. I think that basically everything that I'm aware of that exists has a naturalistic explanation that makes sense to me. So that's why I was curious to have you on to ask about, what are some of the things that you would consider to be real and not natural, or not physical, or not material, or I guess that's the kind of the
Mhm.
question that was the most pressing on my mind. If there's a different question that you'd like to start with, you can go ahead and introduce it however you want. But that's the main question that's on my mind.
Yeah. So first of all, to characterize the distinction between natural and non-natural is actually really difficult. And
Mm,
so people, and I'm very sympathetic to these people that say they're not naturalists because they just don't understand the distinction. And I flirt with that position often, right? Like I just and it's not quite clear what everyone is saying when they're saying that I'm a naturalist or that something is natural. Um, and so the thing is that when you say I have a brain, okay,
mm,
I get that. But when the claim is made that the brain is a natural thing, what is being said? Okay. Um, and for me, I like to understand the natural in terms of what we can basically describe in terms of laws or theories that make uh, certain types of predictions that are ex ante before the fact, and
yep.
they're specifiable. They have certain placeholders, where we might talk mass, um, acceleration, and force, or whatever, as an example, Newton. Um, and so that's one way to characterize the difference. That if there are things out there that can't be described in terms of laws or theories, then they're just not natural. Well, so that automatically, there's some things, and there could be things that themselves, like brains. Are there any theories of brains, laws of brains? Well, perhaps no, but the idea is that they depend on things
Yeah.
that have that are you could think. I think the phrase is they're covered by laws, right? So the things that kind of make up the brain, or the brain depends on, can be described in terms of some scientific theories or laws, right? So there are a couple things that come to mind about what wouldn't be able to be described by laws. Well, mathematics, right? So There are no theories or laws. And when we talk about theories and laws in science, we're really talking about like kind of causality or predictions, you know, that kind of thing. The number 7, we don't have a theory of causality about the number 7. We know it's odd. We know it's a prime number. And if it exists, whether in some kind of weird platonic realm or in your mind or whatever, right? It's not natural in the way that I've described. Because it can't be described. I mean, science has to presuppose mathematical truths in order to do science. So same with logic. You know, logic, certain logical truths. A is A. A cannot be both not A. Well, you can't have a conjunction of A and not A at any given moment. That can't be true. These are truths that are sort of independent of our scientific schemes and theories and laws. So if there are propositions, which are things that bear the property of truth, so it's true that A is A, that's something that bears the property of truth, that's a proposition. If there are propositions, they're not going to be laws or theories about that kind of thing either. Because once again, scientific theory presupposes that kind of thing. So that's one way. That's the first suspicion, right? Is that, well, the second that you demarcate between natural and non-natural, well, then they're going to be things that are not natural, and given that definition, and they're going to be things that there are. And as I presented, some people, in fact, many don't construe naturalism the way that I just did. There are different definitions of natural. But yeah, I guess it's a start. What do you mean by when you're a naturalist, when you self-describe as a naturalist, what do you mean? Because I could very well be a naturalist under your definition.
Yeah. So I think that you basically said everything I was going to say. I mean, like when you were describing like physical phenomenon that is described by physical laws. I think that that's like a good approach generally to when you're talking about things that are natural. Something that's supernatural obviously would not follow physical laws. I think that like I would juxtapose natural with supernatural. Maybe you would juxtapose it. If there's some difference between supernatural and like non-natural, if there's something that's non-natural that's not supernatural, that's something that would be new to me. But that's generally how I think about it. Is something that's not supernatural is natural. So maybe you would disagree with that, but that's just what I was thinking. I thought that what you were talking about with like brains and thought states as as being sort of the result of like brain activity, which is determined by physical law. So that's my kind of thought process of how I would approach that. So I was happy to see that you touched on that. On the whole idea of like the number 7 existing, or like the laws of mathematics or logic or something, that's what I just don't understand. Like, do you think that the number 7 like really exists somewhere? Like you mentioned, like Plato. Do you think is that something that you think? Like, because
I'm
personally,
inclined to say so. Yeah, I'm
I don't
inclined to
think
think
number
like
7.
propositions and sets and numbers exist. It is independently from our scheme, but I could be wrong about that. I'm not married to this. I mean, there are very intelligent people that disagree with me. And going back to your point about supernatural, I mean, it's all terminological. I think the idea of when I invoke the term supernatural, people think of God and stuff that are like God, like souls and afterlives and stuff like that. And if that seems to be the usage, if the number 7 exists, it'd be weird to call that supernatural. It's just not natural. I mean, it doesn't. The idea of supernatural seems to imply also these causal powers that are beyond the causal powers as seen in nature. And 7 is weak, impotent. It doesn't really do anything, right? Like we can think about it, but we're not worried about the number 7 being around the corner to like kill us, right? Like, I mean, it's causally inert. And the notion of supernatural involves a lot, like certain notions of power, like God and souls, and the afterlife has certain sets of powers that are unlike the powers seen in nature. And so that's why I refrain from using the word supernatural, except in the context of those supernatural powers, supernatural causality, or something like that. Now, yeah.
Yeah, so like I don't know. I would think that supernatural would just be something that is like can't be explained by natural laws. So like I
Mhm.
wouldn't think that it would necessarily have to do with any higher powers. Um, like if something just changed colors or shape that couldn't be explained by any kind of natural phenomenon, then I would think that that would be non-natural, supernatural. But that
Mhm.
wouldn't necessarily be involving any god or deities, or I don't know what kind of magic would account for
Mhm.
that. But magic is just kind of what I would define as supernatural. Any kind of magic, whether it's god magic or black magic or whatever kind of magic. I don't know. I don't really believe in
Mhm.
magic, but I'm a naturalist. Um, and then I don't really understand what you're bringing up about causality, but I wouldn't even necessarily say that causality is necessarily fundamental to like a reality or a
Mhm.
naturalistic framework necessarily. On a quantum level, causality breaks down a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah. So there are scientists that are doing away with the notion of cause, and I get why. But here we can just use cause in the Humean sense, which is like some kind of constant conjunction of events. So we don't really, like the debate is that you have one event and you have another event, and let's say event A and event B, and to say that they're causally connected is to posit something else in that system that in between event A and B, that there's some kind of cause linking them. Well, Hume was like, I don't know about this. It seems like when all cause could reduce to is just constant conjunction of events. There's nothing sort of in between, no cause existing other than the pattern of events that we witness or experience. And sure, so you could talk about causality in this kind of robust way, non-Humean way, or you can talk about causality in a Humean way and just get rid of the extra thing that is in between these events, these pattern of events. It makes no difference to me. Um, I think maybe Hume might be right, but so some people want to say that like they're completely like I don't even know what a cause is. Then we just talk about expectation, like like if X causes Y, then given X, I'd expect Y or something like that. And then that's done deal. We know what we can get rid of causal language. We can talk about our expectations given our
Here,
descriptions. Mhm.
we have Leo Phileas in the chat who claims to be your number one biggest fan, who has offered us a definition of natural as such. So I'm curious as to what you think of this, that the natural world is the totality of physical space-time reality and all which is extended through, contained within, or consistent with it. So according to this, do you think that you would consider that there's anything that wouldn't fit into this category of natural, that you would consider non-natural, that you would say is real or existent?
Well, there's certain mental constructions I'd question like about like I mean, is it first of all, you're asking if this is a fine definition of naturalism. I mean, I've seen this. I don't really. This is a perfectly fine usage. I don't really think you need the word physical there.
Yeah.
Because then there's a question about what physical means, and then you get back into the whole definition circle. Yeah, I've seen that definition, and I'm not really against it at all.
Okay.
There's a question about you know does time exist is time in like so you think of the if I the way I'm thinking of it is, and Leo can correct me, is that you have the conditions for space and time, and then you have that which is contained in it. And is he saying that time and space themselves are natural things, or is it what's contained in that system natural? Well, then, if it's the case that I don't know, maybe you can clarify. Well, then we ask questions about time. Is time itself natural, and why is it natural? Could you just have a case where there's no space but just time? And would naturalism be false in that
So I
system?
think that with our current framework, or with our current understanding of math and physics, I think a lot of physicists are leaning towards the camp that space and time are emergent phenomenon of like a more fundamental reality that doesn't have space and time, or at least they've made progress with space in regards to that, like in string theory.
Mhm.
The emergence of time is still something that has not been mathematically rigorously worked out to my knowledge. They're still working on it in string theory, but considering space and time are kind of part of the same manifold, it's thought that space and time are or could be emergent phenomenon. So I
Mhm.
would consider them to be physical, yeah.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Well, it depends. I mean, because different
and I
uses
would
of time.
also really quick
Yeah, of
one
course.
more thing. I wouldn't say that things are in space time. I think that it's more accurate to say that things are extended through or like extended in space time. Um,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
things are spatially or temporally extended.
The question is, though, I mean, like, I don't know how you're using, because there are different notions of time. There's like metric time, there's metaphysical time, there's different, physical time. And there's like, Craig even comes up with like divine time, like there's all
Yeah.
sorts of senses of time. The idea is that do you think there's something that makes moments possible or sequences moments, or that, um, yeah, makes change possible? Like, what does that look like on your view?
Yeah, I don't even know how to begin to answer that question, honestly.
Well, the thing is that they're moments, right? They're events. And there are, so you can have a succession of events. Um, and then there's a question about why they're events at all and what makes events possible. Because an event itself, a moment, is not time. It's a moment of time.
Yeah.
So each moment is going to be distinct. So there's a relationship between the sequence, the specific sequence of moments, the moment itself, and and in that sequence you're going to have changes, and all of this is is kind of built on this idea of time. And then there's a question about whether the nature of that is that natural. Can we scientifically describe, this thing that undergirds the possibility of moments, the sequence of moments, and the possibility of change? I mean, that to me, that's maybe there's an answer you have, but or did you? I thought you wanted to say something, but um, yeah. I mean, I don't really have an issue. There are multiple ways of defining naturalism. Another way of defining naturalism, and I actually really like this definition. Um, that which is natural is something that's in principle accessible to all psychologies. That's an interesting definition for me.
Could you repeat that one more time?
That which is natural is equally accessible to all psychologies.
Wow, that's really interesting. I definitely would not have ever arrived at a definition like that.
Yeah.
Equally accessible to all. Is there what? What is equally accessible to all psychologies? I don't get
Okay.
that. I
Let me
mean,
give
you
you.
have schizophrenics, you have people with very warped perceptions of reality. So I don't know
Yeah, so
about
that would
defining each
that
by
would rule out
psychology.
experiences, right? So experiences are not natural. My experience about
Yeah,
like
that's
is
so that
ruled out.
I would definitely the way I'm thinking about these things is that there's like um I would say objective and subjective reality, but maybe, I mean, intersubjective might be a more accurate word than objective. But
Mhm,
I definitely think that things can be subjectively real in a sense that, I can have experience of things that are not objectively real, but I
mhm,
can still have an experience of them. And that experience is still real, um, in a sense that there's brain activity going on. There is a real life thing occurring. I am having that experience, even though it's not real in an objective sense, in that it can
mhm.
it can be shared with others, or it fits that definition of um, being able to be accessed by any psychologies.
Maybe there's a good example here. Suppose we find human remains, or an alien finds human remains, okay, from like 2,000 years ago. The human, let's say, is kind of stuck in the ice age. There are those fossilized humans in like an ice glacial climates, where like they're still wearing clothing. You can see the skin and everything.
I
And
would object to the word fossilized because I don't think that they're permineralized bone, but sure, I know what you mean.
okay, yeah. So I may not be using the right term there, but they're like encased and preserved. Preserved is probably the better word in ice. So the the alien notices that there's this thing around the remains of the human around their neck with these bead-like things. Like so, imagine a necklace. Imagine some kind of long hair with a braid, and maybe some kind of dress-like thing.
Okay.
Right. And the alien can basically break all that down chemically, right? Okay, so the bead is made of this kind of mineral, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to know. It could break down. Oh, well, it has this type of DNA as XX chromosomes, or can recognize what we call XX chromosomes, and notice that basically they can break it all down. But what they can't break down without talking to us is whether the necklace was feminine or masculine.
Now, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, that they would not be able to break that down without discussing that with us. It might be possible for them to be able to break that down with a sufficient enough understanding of like the materialistic phenomenon going on in brain chemistry.
Okay, what about so but how would you know? I mean, at least our current science, right, could not they have nothing to say about whether a brain is feminine or masculine, right?
I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I mean, there are studies that have gone on about like the differences between like man and woman brain.
But that's sex.
Yes, but they've also done studies on transgender brains that, at least the ones I'm familiar with, have shown that like trans brains are more similar to the gender they identify as than the gender that they were assigned at birth.
Okay, let's put aside the brain. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but let's examine the necklace and the dress, right? You and I would say this is likely a woman. This is a feminine feature, right? Given our background with humans, right? We can know that, but how can an alien dissect chemically, so to speak, the necklace and the dress and find femininity?
So, like, if they had access to the brain state, then I would say.
No, they don't have access to you or me or the woman, right?
So then I would say that it's if there is no access, right? If there's no brain state that is like interpreting the necklace, then the necklace is not masculine or feminine in reality. And at the moment that you have a person there with a brain that is familiar with that culture, then all of a sudden there is a real, physically real process going on in their brain that can be interpreted to determine whether or not there is a masculine or feminine connotation with the necklace.
Okay, so let me be as clear as possible about the hypothetical. So the alien comes down, we exist, right? But they're for whatever reason they refuse to talk to us. And it's interesting that you're going to the brain as a way for the alien to reveal whether the necklace is feminine or the dress is feminine, right? Yeah. Which to you, brains tying to psychology, which is kind of fitting with my definition, is that the alien cannot know if the dress is feminine or masculine, or without appealing to psychological states.
Yeah.
Right. And that's so the idea is that all the alien has access to is the stuff that every psychology would have access to, no matter what kind of alien you are. When you break down the bead that makes up the necklace, it's going to break down to jade, and that refers to some chemical structure or whatever. Yeah. Everyone is going to be seeing that chemical structure in the necklace, right? But only you and I, or someone that is aware of our social practices, our psychological practices, would look at that bead and like, man, that's a really pretty necklace, and we associate femininity. So the idea is that the gender constructs are something that scientists have less to say about. You would make the argument that, well, look, if psychology just is brain, okay, then and people have access to each other's brains, then in principle everything is equally accessible to every psychology. But I think that gets into a conversation about the nature of self-knowledge, and the nature of what it means for it to be your experience, right? So if I have intimacy with a sexual partner, and there's a way that feels like to me, that's the closest we're gonna get to understand, right? My self of that mental state is the most intimate knowledge you could ever have, and for a third party to get as close to that knowledge is just to be me, right?
Mm,
And so there is a kind of privacy that I'm trying to imply here. There's a privacy
mhm.
to experiential knowledge that if the scientists were to ever reach, it would just mean that they become who I am. They would just be me. Who has close, better, more intimate knowledge than you, and other than you, right? And so I think that that's kind of the direction, is that there's this distinction between the first person point of view and the third person point of view, the
Sure.
impartial and the partial state, and
Well,
the idea is. Mhm,
it seems like you're making like a distinction about like a certain level of like qualia to like these personal
mhm.
experiences. But I don't necessarily understand how that ties into the idea of something like that being non-natural or not naturalistic. Like,
Yeah,
how does that?
mhm,
Yeah, it
yeah.
just kind of bridge that gap for me, I guess.
Well, I offered an alternative definition of natural, right? So, the alternative definition is that anything that's natural is equally accessible to all psychologies. My experience
Mhm,
of, when I'm laying with someone or cuddling with someone and I'm having a great time, it's awesome, right?
mhm.
Is not accessible to anyone else but me in the way that it is.
So here's an interesting hypothetical then.
Mm,
So if we were to perfectly replicate your brain, right? Every single
mhm,
atom in the exact same place and expose like both of those two brains that are identical atomically um, to the same exact stimuli, they would
mhm.
react in they would be, you basically have two identical experiences that are there's no way to tell them apart. Like they would be exact. So wouldn't that be like I mean that would no longer be that kind of private non-replicable experience that only you are having. Now there's two identical experiences going on in two different individual brains.
Okay, so I hope I don't nitpick too much here, but they can't be identical,
Why
right?
not?
Otherwise, they'd be the same. It'd be
Well,
me.
they're the same, it's just in different spaces.
Okay,
So, like, they
okay.
have all the exact same relationships. So, for example, like, one electron is indistinguishable from another electron, except for they are in two different locations. But if you swapped them, you
Mhm.
would never know if they were swapped or not because they are indistinguishable by every metric.
Let's just apply it to this case right now. Right now, you have a point, and you're looking at me wearing a red shirt.
Yep.
Okay, so in your thought experiment, we create someone just like you, genetically the same, anatomically the same, maybe atomistically the same, right? But they would have to have a different point of view, right? Because where are you placing this person, right? And your point of view? Well, then it's just you, right? If you're placing them outside of your point of view, then you got two different points of view. They're not going to have the same experience that you're having
Yeah,
when
like,
you're
so
looking at me right now.
let's hook them up to the two identical machines that are just like playing the same television show in the same room. Like we've replicated the same conditions for the both of them, but they are in different locations. But we've just replicated the same conditions externally and like the same arrangements of atoms in the brain structure. To me, that would be two identical like awarenesses, conscious beings, entities, whatever, two identical experiences unfolding in identical ways.
Mhm. Yeah, maybe I have to think about it a little bit. It's certainly, so I think what you wanna do is you wanna put them in some kind of simulation,
Yeah.
right? Um,
So,
where
for
they're it
example, just because we have actually done this experiment, not with human brains, but with the very most simple brain that there is, a nematode brain. It's only got like 302 neurons. So
Mhm,
it was very easy for us to make an exact replica, a digital replica. So we took an actual real nematode brain and we copied all the exact arrangements of the neurons in a computer program, and then we we gave the real nematode and the computer nematode brain the same stimulation, and they reacted in the exact same way. They were indistinguishable. The computer nematode and the real nematode, like their behaviors were identical because they had the same brain. So
Yeah,
I would
so the
think
question
that the
is,
same thing would happen with a human.
the question is, if you put this person who is not you technically, but it's just carbon copy of you, atom copy of you in a simulation, what's the evidence to suggest that they do have the same experience?
Well, I would think that like they would have the exact same experience just
But
because
why would we think that? How do
they're
we, in other
composed.
words, how do we verify that?
Well, they're composed of all the exact same atoms in all the exact same places. So if you're agreeing in cause and effect, right,
Mm-hmm.
then all of their causes are the same. So all of the effects would also be the same.
No, but you see, that's to assume that um, mental states and qualia operate in that causal system. That's to assume that
Mhm.
the causal system is closed, right? And so the idea is that while I might think that I think there's something to think about what you're saying. I don't think what you're saying is like, I think it's a good response. The point is that what can scientists appeal to as evidence to verify that they're in fact the same experiences? And at best, you can appeal to some kind of philosophical argument that all causal systems are closed, but that's not. And then there's a question about what's the evidence for that, right? And I've never really heard a good answer. It might be that they have quote unquote the same experience. I mean, I have to think about it. Humans are
Ultimately, the only thing that I'd be able to answer that with is if it looks like a duck, if it sounds like a duck, chances are it's probably a duck. So,
yeah, but
like,
that's not meeting the rigor of the scientific method.
well, it's good enough for me anyway.
Okay,
I don't
well,
know
look, it
how.
might be good enough for me, but the point is that what science is in the business of is studying the natural world. It makes claims
Mhm,
given a certain methodology about the natural world, and you're making a claim about the natural world.
mhm.
Um, and there's a question of like, is it supported by the scientific method or some relevant methodology? And it's not, right? And so, I mean, it seems you could say it seems obvious. Quacks like a dog, looks like a dog, all this stuff, and I might agree, but it just hasn't met that rigor that scientists want to say they're in fact the same, because the truth is that we don't have access like you have access to your mental states. That's just the fact right now. Even if we have access to every atom of your, outside of here, from over this perspective, we look at every atom. The best we can come up with is correlations, right? Like when people are in pain, these set of atoms or this type of physiology or this type of chemistry usually looks like this, and so it looks like that. So you're likely in pain. That's how we make inferences to quality.
So I guess I would think that it would be meeting the scientific standard of evidence, um, or at least a scientific standard, if it was capable of making like testable, verifiable predictions that came true. So we would say, like with the nematode example, right? We would make a prediction if we give a certain stimulus to both the digital nematode and the real nematode, then our prediction would be X behavior based on our computer model. This is what the digital one did, so the real one should do that behavior. So then if it does that behavior, then that is like lending credence to the weight of evidence that you really do have something there, that you are, it really is a duck. It doesn't, if it's like, to me, like the fact that it could make predictions would at least lend credence to it being
But
valid.
think of the alternative hypothesis. The alternative hypothesis is that there have different qualitative states, but
Mhm.
that doesn't imply that they would behave differently, right? Because presumably, when I'm having certain relations with a sexual partner, and you're having the sexual relations with a certain partner, we might be, yelling out "daddy" at the same time. I'm sorry, is this a PG channel? I don't know. So we might be yelling at the same behaviors, but we have very different qualitative states. Um,
Mm.
so the idea is that if you compare the hypotheses, and let me be the first to say that I think dualism generates not predictions on the level of scientific rigor. I think that it's unfalsifiable. But the reason why I lean towards dualism is not because of the predictions it makes, but because of the nature of a mental state, the nature of self, and the nature of normativity, right? The nature of what it means that we ought to do something and what we ought not to do something, right? That's so that it's purely on philosophical grounds. I don't think the science supports me or undermines me, right? I think it's unfalsifiable. I could, in principle, accept any of the data that the neurologist has, right, and say, yeah, that's fine. That doesn't undermine my thesis. So I think I mean, at the same time, we can make loose inductive inferences that I wouldn't argue rise to the level of scientific rigor, the behavior of persons and the kind of qualitative states they have or the mental states they have. And that's kind of what you're doing. And I'm totally fine with that. It's a question of whether it can rise up to the level of theory or it can be theorized in the way that we could theorize about electrons. So I think that maybe the standard of scientific, I guess what I'm calling scientific rigor, it might be too rigorous. If you're watering down science to loose inductive inferences, loose generalizations, then I might agree with you. Yeah, you can. Yeah, if the nematodes both made the same behaviors, so they're given the way that humans work. If you're in pain and I'm in pain, we both scream. So if we're both screaming, we might be in pain, right? Like with the similar behaviors. But the question is are there laws about such things and
Yeah,
how?
I guess it kind of comes down to, I mean, philosophy is not really my forte. I know you really like philosophy. Maybe like one of the things that I don't spend any time out of my day thinking about, but has been posed before is like people will ask, well, how do we know that the red that I see is the same as the red that you see? We
Mhm,
both agree that your shirt is red, but my red could be totally different than your red. And
mhm.
like, yeah, I mean, those questions were interesting to think about in like middle school, but I've just sort of, I guess if you want to say that I cannot prove that we have the same reds, I mean, sure, I would agree with you, but like I'm gonna
I'm fine with
continue
saying
to
we can.
operate as if we both see the same red.
I'm
Like,
fine with saying that we can make inferences on similar behavior to, like, I think that if I said there's a red object there amongst other colored objects, and you pick out the one that I would use the description
yeah.
red for, then I would think that given that behavior, you're likely have the same qualitative state. But the question is that a scientific truth?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, again, I don't think that we could necessarily prove that our qualia were the exact same,
Well, what
like
do you mean by prove?
currently,
Because I
but
think you can support it. I think the notion of prove is actually a very unhelpful term because
yeah, yeah.
yeah, but the point is that I think you can be very rational and have justification for thinking that we do have the same red, that we have the same thing in mind when we're saying a red object. Okay. But the question is, how did we come to know that? Is it via a scientific methodology? Or is it on this kind of loose inductive inference that when I use the term red, I have something in mind. There's certain behaviors that I exhibit when I'm thinking about red, and I see those exhibitions in other persons, and so they likely are thinking of the same thing. If you're calling that science, then we've watered down science. That's fine, but it just doesn't come on that level of like, can it be theorized about? Are there laws of redness as in the qualitative sense, right? And I mean that we're drawing from, like, how do we generalize about this scientifically? And I'm not so sure if anybody has gone to that level.
So, am I understanding you that the thing ultimately that you would consider to be real but not natural are these kind of like subjective, like qualia experiences? Or
Yeah, although I'm less committed. To be honest, like that's I have a friend who's like really pressing me on what a qualitative state is in the first place, and I'm having a hard time. So maybe you might meet me next year. I'll be like, "There's no such thing," right? But I'm not so sure. But the notion of intentionality is probably a little bit more harder to give up on than qualia. But like, so the idea of having commitments, beliefs, and desires.
Mhm.
Again, you still have like, if I ask you, do you believe that the Earth is round? you have an authority, right? And there's this presumption that if you believe it, you believe about it, and if you believe about it, then you believe it, right? There's a presumption of knowledge there that you have of your own intentionality, your own beliefs and commitments and desires or whatnot, and that seems to be in the same category of quality insofar as that you have this special type of self-knowledge of it, and that is sort of inaccessible to the third person point
Do
of
you
view.
really think that it's inaccessible though? I mean, because um, I would consider it to be within the realm of possibility that we could induce certain intentions or desires in your brain
Mhm.
by, direct manipulation. So,
I'm
like,
right with you on there. I have no problem with that, right? Dualists are fine to say that there can be naturalistic explanations for non-natural things, right? I mean, just think about theism for a second, right? The notion of a miracle, right? So, um, the Red Sea Party. Now, I'm no theist. I don't think the Red Sea Party, but just as an illustration, right? So God parted the Red Sea. Up goes the Red Sea into the air, and then so that's a non-natural event. Let's say maybe a supernatural event. It was caused by something that can't be described in terms of our laws or in scientific theories. And then God, let's go, right? And the water comes clashing back. And then there should be, I mean, if the non-natural causality kind of stopped with, God letting go of the Red Sea and going back, right? Then the way that everything is arranged after the parting of the Red Sea might be really crazy, right?
yeah,
You might have, all distorted, a very distorted ecosystem to say the
yeah,
least. All
definitely.
right, and all of that then cause a ripple effect of physical causes, right?
Mhm.
And so that's just to say that a supernatural event can explain a set of physical events or cascade of physical causal events, and vice versa, right? So it could be that uh, we can grant for the sake of argument that being drunk, the mental state of being drunk, is in fact not something that's describable in terms of theories. Like how it feels to you to be drunk is not describable in terms of a theory, but it has a naturalistic explanation. Now we can very well detail how alcohol influences your body and all the way down to your brain, and we can map that out. But in terms of what it's like to be drunk, right? That's when scientists no longer. That's a matter of your knowledge, your special accessibility of your mental states.
Danny, really quick, some people are saying that your mic is a little bit like painful.
Oh, okay.
Said something about turn down your
Is this any
gain.
better?
Um, I think so,
I hope
but
so.
okay. Um,
Okay, this should
I
be
wasn't
better.
necessarily hearing it, but I was just hearing people in the chat say like
I
turn
lowered it.
down the gain or whatever. So
I lowered it. Okay.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I don't know. I mean, to me, like if all of our subjective experiences can be explained by naturalistic mechanisms, then like all I guess what you're saying is that the actual experience cannot be conveyed, if the experience itself is completely produced by naturalistic
Right.
mechanisms.
hmm Yeah. So I would be some kind of interactionist that the natural and the physical and non-physical can interact, and there can be a physical explanation for a non-natural event.
Okay, so here's something that I would ask then,
hmm
because um personally, like just in my own
hmm
journey of self-discovery, like what am I, like all these things, the understanding that I have come to after meditation and reading and blah 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 is that I would identify as an awareness. So I can be aware of lots of stuff. I can be aware of external stimuli. I can be aware of internal stimuli. I can be aware of like thoughts or desires. These things come across my awareness, but ultimately I identify as an awareness, not as any of those things. So to me, what you're basically saying is like all of these I don't know. It kind of sounds like you're saying that the internal things that I'm calling like internal stimuli or internal happenings that I am aware of, you're
Mhm.
saying that those things are not natural.
Mhm.
But to me, what you're saying is what is not natural about them is the like the process of being aware of them. So to
Yes. Mhm.
me, the external things are the exact same. Like I don't really necessarily see that strong of a distinction between the external and the internal stimuli as a function of how I interact with them with my awareness. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Well, let's go back to the alien example. So they analyze the necklace. It's made of jade.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, do you think that they should, in principle, come to the same chemical determination of jade as you?
Yes.
Okay. Um, and but they're going to be things that you consider, whether you consider um necklaces to be feminine or masculine, or whether
Hmm.
society considers them to be feminine or masculine, right?
Hmm.
You're gonna have there's no special feature of the
Oh,
jade that of the
I would
jade.
think that there is.
What?
And what I would say is like
Okay.
for the aliens to understand even the question that I'm asking them, is this jade more feminine or masculine? Then for them to develop an understanding of what that means, like they could look at my brain state when I'm asking the question because those concepts are going to be brought up. And so they can understand the distinction between masculine and feminine by like observing the brain activity as I formulate the question. And then in determining the answer, they could expose a jade necklace to various like brains and
Hmm.
see how those brains light up. And if they light up in patterns that more mirror what people like the patterns that come about when people think of masculine things versus feminine things, then they could say this jade is more masculine.
Okay. There are
That's my thought process.
two things. First of all, do you think we can do this now?
No.
Okay. So you're just saying that we can do it in principle.
Yes, I would
Okay.
think that
Okay.
that would
Okay.
be physically possible to do.
Okay. And the second thing, to kind of go back, let's go to the notion of pain. Okay, because
Okay.
whatever qualia means, right? I think everyone's going to agree that there is a sense of there's pain out there, right?
Sure.
Do you think it's possible, and there's some possible world where you're hooked up by a bunch of scientists,
Hmm.
okay, that you're hooked up there, and they analyze your brain, and they say, well, you're in horrible pain right now, and
Hmm.
you feel as you are now. Do you think it's possible for you to be wrong?
Like that I'm not like I don't feel like I'm in horrible pain right
You
now.
feel
So
as you do right now, but
okay.
you're taken to a special laboratory.
No, I don't think that I could be wrong. If I'm not
Why?
feeling
Why
pain,
can the
then I'm not
scientists
in
be
pain.
wrong? Why can the scientists be wrong and not you?
Well, I would think that the scientists would be wrong because maybe they are examining the wrong thing or
But
like
I'm asking if it's possible. Is it logically possible? Is there some world where you feel as you are now,
yeah,
and you're hooked up by by neurosurgeons, let's say
yeah.
sincere ones, right? And and they say you're in a state of pain, and you're wrong. You said you're not reporting that you're in a state of pain. Well, you're just wrong. You're in a state of pain.
I
Why is
think
it
that
that your
there would have
authority?
to be some naturalistic mechanism to explain that disconnect. Like if the pain centers of my brain are lighting up as if I'm experiencing pain, then if I'm not consciously aware of that, then there has to be some sort of disconnect where that signal is not making it to my conscious
Okay, so
awareness.
then you can be wrong. You're the access mechanism, so to speak, is
Yeah.
off, and you are in pain.
Well, no, I wouldn't be in pain because again, I identify as my awareness. So if I'm not aware of that pain, then I cannot be in that pain.
Okay, let me be a little bit more focused on my question. Is there a logical contradiction in saying that for the scientists to say that you're in pain and then be right and you feel as you are right now?
No.
There's no logical so you can be wrong. They can be right. So there is a possible world where The neurosurgeons tell you you're in pain, and then when you report that I'm not in pain,
No,
right?
I don't think that can be possible.
Well,
Like,
then there's gonna be a logical contradiction.
why? I'm not really I'm not getting this. I don't see the logical contradiction.
Oh, I
Like,
thought you
I'm
were saying.
saying that if I am not experiencing that pain, then there is a naturalistic mechanism that the scientists are missing. That's why they're wrong.
Okay, maybe I think maybe I misheard you. Okay, so let's just go over it again. Okay, is there a logical contradiction in this state of affairs? Okay, the scientists say that you're in pain, and they are right. They are right. Okay, and yet you feel the way that you feel right now.
Yeah, that cannot. Those two things cannot be
Okay, so
both
there is
correct.
a logical contradiction.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, what's the logical contradiction?
Well, because like I'm not in pain. If I'm not aware of the pain, then I'm not in pain.
You're just wrong on that hypothetical. What's the logical contradiction that
Because I cannot be wrong because
why can you
the
not be
claim
wrong?
is that I am in pain. So I cannot be wrong about that.
Why can't you be wrong? That's begging the question.
I don't get it. I really don't get it. I
All
don't
right.
get
Well,
I don't get what the issue with what I'm saying is.
let me cut to the chase. The chase is that there is some special kind of authority that you have about what mental state you're in. It's very unique in such that it's not possible. And I would agree with you, by the way. It's not possible for you to be wrong. It's not possible for a scientist to be right about you being in pain and yet feeling the way as we are, right? And that feature is not present in as we observe the natural world, right? Because notice we can be wrong. This could all be hallucination, right? But we can hallucinate our own perceptions of our own qualitative states. And so there's something unique going on
But you
when it
can't be
comes to
wrong
judgment.
about that though.
Huh?
I don't understand how you can be wrong about a hallucination.
I'm saying that I'm looking at you right now. You could be I'm perceiving you as a human being. This could be a hallucination, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but you can that possibility of failure does not exist when we introspect about how we feel. Doesn't exist.
But it doesn't exist with the hallucinations either.
No,
Like,
it does, right? Look, it's true. I think that I'm talking to a real person. Could I be wrong? Yes. It's true that I'm not in pain. Could I be wrong? No.
so let me see. Leo's trying to summarize, saying that Danny is asking if one could be in a state of actual physiological pain despite the agent not feeling pain. It seems to be the evident answer is yes. I don't understand how
I disagree with
that.
Leo. I agree with your answer.
Okay.
Okay. I agree with your answer, but
Okay, yeah, I don't agree with Leo that that answer is yes. I guess we're agreeing on this,
we're
but
agreeing on this. But what I'm
to
trying to
me,
point.
to me, if you're having a hallucination, right? If you are seeing a pink elephant in your room, you cannot be wrong about
No,
that.
no, no, no,
You
no.
are seeing it.
That's not what I said. That's not. I'm saying that I'm looking at you right now, or I'm looking at an elephant, or whatever. Could I be hallucinating? Could I be wrong about what I'm perceiving? Yes.
Yes,
Right.
yeah, of course.
Okay. But then when I introspect about my feelings, I feel that I'm not in pain. Could I be wrong? No. There's suddenly something special.
Wait, let me qualify. You cannot be wrong about what you are seeing. You can be wrong about if what you're seeing is really there.
That's fine, right? Just like, but that kind of phenomenon about that when we introspect into how we feel, whether we're in pain or in pleasure, state of pleasure, whatever, that kind of descriptions about fallibility and and the point is that, like, for instance, when I introspect, do you think I'm introspecting about, like, let's say I'm having a pleasurable state? Okay, when I
Mhm.
introspect that, yeah, I'm in a pleasurable state. Am I introspecting about a brain state?
Are you introspecting about a brain state? What I guess could you use different words in your question? I don't really
Okay,
get what
so
you mean.
do you think a state of pain is identical in some kind of way to a physiological state, right? Or whether that be a brain state or some kind of physiological state, right?
Ultimately, I think that all thoughts, feelings, experiences are ultimately just like different patterns of like salt water diffusion.
Okay,
Like the actual substance of a thought is like the salty ions and the neurons in your brain.
All
So
right.
like there is a material substance for all of these things.
I think
And
you're
it's like,
so you would say yes, right? That when
yes.
okay, now when you're introspecting about them, when you're, let's say, whatever this means, you wonder, am I in pain, right? And you introspect. Are you introspecting about those physical states, the physiological states that you described in terms of water and air?
Am I no, I would be introspecting about my
But they're
experience of it.
identical.
Huh?
But they're identical.
No, I don't think that they're identical. I mean, my experience of these materialistic processes is not necessarily identical with the processes themselves. I
What
think
are
that
they
there's
identical with?
a different layer of yeah.
Is your belief state or your state of pain identical with anything physical that can be physically described by scientists?
My experience itself.
Yeah.
I think that it's explained by like
Uh,
physical things, but I don't think it's identical with them.
oh, well, look, that's, I bad news for you. That's compatible with dualism.
Mm, I mean, I would still
Dualism.
think that it's not like physically real. I mean, it's an emergent kind of
Okay. Okay.
like
Okay.
it's an experience of something that is physically real, and like there is material substance to these things, but it's just that like it's like the difference between like if I drew a picture of a dinosaur,
Hmm.
um, there's like the connotation that like you could recognize that and say, hey, that's a dinosaur. But somebody else might say that's just a bunch of like graphite markings on paper, and like they don't see the dinosaur at all. They just see what it really physically is. So the dinosaur is like emergent from the material.
So would you say it's like water in the sense that you have H2O, and then when those molecules come together, you get some new emergent properties of the molecule? Is that kind of the idea? Because I'm trying to
Um,
understand what you mean by emergence exactly.
yeah,
Um,
I mean, essentially,
okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, there's that's interesting. There are people that take that view. It's arguably compatible with non-naturalism. But
well, I guess
um
I'm learning new things about myself tonight then.
yeah, it depends on how you consider it. Look, you could say that you're naturalist insofar as anything that exists depends on physical structures.
Yeah.
And you could, so I guess you could do that. And emergence is a kind of dependency relation, but it's just, I don't know, it gets a little tricky. And I'm not so wedded
So
to,
I guess my distinction that I made, and just the way that I think about things is I think about like subjectively real things, as in my experiences are subjectively real; they're real to me. Um, but I also think about things as a like real sense in an intersubjective or an objective way.
okay. Okay, now
So
that I understand your view a little bit more, but we can go back. Okay, but we can go back. I'm curious because um it's really interesting to me that you, because Leo gave an alternative answer. I think you and I agree, but we disagree about why, maybe perhaps, or the implications, I should say. I you and I agree on something, that it's not possible for in any possible world with whatever technology available, with whatever type of knowledge that is being
mhm.
held by scientists, that if a scientist hooks us up to this kind of stuff and they would tell us that we're in pain and we feel as we are now, it's not possible for them to be right. Right.
So
And
I will clarify with this
mhm.
example that I kind of feel like this scenario itself is impossible.
Yeah, yeah, that's, oh wait, yeah, that it's impossible. The scenario in which a scientist tells you you're in pain and they're right, and you're feeling as we are, is impossible. Right.
Well, like
I agree with
I
you.
feel like if there's a scenario, like in the scenario, the scientists would understand the brain, like the way that the brain works and creates consciousness in a way that we don't currently. Like they would have, you know, perfect knowledge of the brain essentially for this hypothetical scenario. If they had that perfect knowledge and they were analyzing your brain and said, you are in a tremendous amount of pain right now, and you said, well, I don't experience that pain, I'm not feeling that pain, I would say that scenario itself is impossible. Like,
Okay, but
if
that's not the
they
scenario
really do have the
described.
perfect knowledge of your brain, they cannot be wrong about your own qualia experience.
Yeah, and that's not the scenario I described, though. And the
I know
science.
it's not.
Okay,
I'm saying that
yeah.
this. Well, I wait. No, actually, I feel like it is the scenario you described. What's different about it?
I'm not talking about brains. In fact, you could be in a world where you don't have a brain, right? You're hooked up to a machine. That your conscience has been transferred or whatever, right? Like, or replicated in some way, right? We don't need to talk about brains. The point is that all I'm looking for is science. Is it logically coherent to say scientists know that you're in pain, but you don't know that you're in pain? And I would say, given the nature of the self and given the special quality of self-knowledge, in other words, right? It's not possible.
Um, yeah. I mean, I think that if you are not in pain, then like it is impossible for you to be in pain. So
But that's not what I agree with
regardless of
that.
like whatever the scientists are observing, like if you are not feeling that pain, then no matter what their observations are, then like you're not in pain.
Mm.
But I don't think that it is impossible, or I don't think that it is possible for them to be able to read out your brain and to like see the pattern of neural firing. And if they
Uh-huh.
show that you're in pain based on your brain state activity, I don't think it is possible for you not to experience that pain.
All right. So now let's analyze why. Why is it that you think it's impossible? Like, I mean, I kind of already asked for a contradiction, and but we agree that it's not possible for scientists to know that you're in pain and you not know that you're in pain. Why is there a contradiction there?
A contradiction between like the scientist knowing you're in pain and you knowing you're not in pain,
Right. Hmm.
because they can't both know contradictory things. It's either pain or not pain.
Yeah, but the claim is that you don't know that you're in pain, right? I'm not saying the hypothetical is not that the scientists know and then you know that you're not in pain, right? The claim is that the scientists know and you don't know.
Mm. But I feel like it's not possible for you not to know,
Okay, but that's what we got to explore. We got to explore that. Why do you think this?
because the definition of pain is an experience you're aware of. I think definitionally you can't have pain that you're not experiencing or aware of.
All right, so it seems like and I could be misunderstanding. It seems like definitionally, a mental state definitionally, if you have a mental state, you have access to that mental state necessarily.
Yeah, a mental state cannot exist without a conscious without experience of that mental state.
Okay. So that's my view. Um, and that is unlike the kind of when we go about the world, when we I'm looking at um, something in a microscope. I could be wrong about what I'm looking at when I think if it's a certain type of thing, or I could be
Mhm.
hallucinating. In other words, our perceptual beliefs about the external world don't operate that way. So now there's a really different type of epistemology for knowledge of the external world
Wait,
and
I don't
knowledge of
understand
ourselves.
that.
What?
Why don't they operate that way?
Okay, because if I'm introspecting and I find that I'm in a state of pleasure, I can't be wrong, right? But
Yeah.
if I'm looking out there and I see um, a rock and I think it's granite, I could be wrong.
No, you cannot be wrong about what you are experiencing or what
I'm,
your
I'm not talking
quality
about.
of
I'm
that.
talking about perception, right? Which is different than experience, right? Um, the
Well,
point is
okay,
that
okay. So here's
okay.
here's what I say. Like,
Mhm.
there is no objective pain. There is objectively a rock out there that either is granite or is not. There is no objective like the version of pain, because pain itself is an experience like that.
Okay, I agree with you. And this is so you're, in other words, creating this solid distinction between the first point of view, subjectivity, and the third person point of view, objectivity, right?
Mhm,
And science operates in the third person point of view, right?
mhm.
And so that is one way to distinguish between natural and non-natural, right? That if the natural sciences they're in the business of studying nature and they only are in that category of in the third person point of view, then that leaves the first person point of view outside of that realm. Now, what you're going to say is that, well, if brains are identical to minds, and which I don't think you're saying, by the way, but if someone were to say that,
I would
then
just say that minds are the subjective experience of a brain's activity.
okay, we'd have to analyze that. But listen, so you're not saying what I'm about to say, but if someone were to say one way to collapse that gap between the first person and third person and say, hey, minds are in the first, what minds are identical to brains, and brains are in the third person point of view. And then what they've done is taking the first point of view and included it in the third person point of view, collapses the distinction, right? You're not doing that. But questions about what you are doing, and I'm sympathetic to what you are doing more than I'm sympathetic to what I've just described. But yeah,
But, okay, I'll break it down like this.
Okay.
I do think that it's possible for other people to access your qualia. I don't think there's anything physically impossible about that. Like, if you ate an apple with like some kind of special machine on that could log that experience of your qualia as you were eating that apple, and then transfer it to somebody else, I think it's perfectly physically possible for them to have the exact same experience, the qualia that you had with the apple, that could be downloaded into that person's brain. Like, I don't see anything physically impossible about that.
Okay, so I'm trying to see what you're responding to.
Well, I'm responding to your notion that you're saying that something that's natural is something that like everyone can access or whatever. So I'm saying, like, I think that everyone can, at least theoretically, like, that they can access qualia. I think that there's nothing that's impossible about that. It's not like we can't do it now, but I don't think that the technology would be physically impossible.
Okay, but I think strictly speaking, I can't access your belief that it's not raining outside.
You can't access my belief that it's not raining outside?
Or I can't access, I mean, like, the thing is that I
Why
could.
not? Why couldn't you access that? If what I'm saying is true, I could literally just
Okay, let me just,
transfer
this
the
might help.
thought to your brain.
I think we're there's a specific distinction here. I'm not saying I can't know that your belief is not raining. I can't know about your belief. I'm not using access here in terms of knowledge. I can know what you believe. I can know how
I think
you
you can
feel.
experience it though too.
Okay. This is the same thing as okay, maybe this sounds a little bit pedantic, but what kind of car do you own?
A Ford?
A Ford, let's say Mustang, okay? And it's red and hot, whatever.
Sure.
2000. Can I get a copy of that and experience exactly the way it is to drive in your car?
Yes.
Okay. So I would say technically no, right? Because the car that I buy, when we say it's identical, we don't mean numerical identity.
But you could make it identical. I mean,
But there's different types of identities, right? So there's something called numerical identity, and that's identical in every sense, in
yes.
every property, right?
I think that you could make that.
But a copy of your car is by definition not numerically identical to your car. They're not. They're different.
Yeah. By like humans. I mean, like, if you go buy two of the same models, they're not going to be exactly identical. But I don't see a physical reason why, if you were being careful enough, you could not make them physically identical. Because after all, atoms are physically identical. If you have one carbon atom and another carbon atom, like, they're interchangeable. They are exactly identical. They do not have the property that you're talking about, where they really are physically indistinguishable. So if the actual building blocks are physically indistinguishable, then I think it should be physically possible to create an exact replica of my car with all the atoms in the same place.
Are these identical?
Approximately, but not truly.
Okay, that's all I'm saying about the red car.
I know, but I'm saying that they could be truly identical. Like, it is physically possible for them to be truly identical. It's not practically possible.
Could these be truly identical?
Yes.
But okay.
Because you agree that they're made of atoms, right?
Sure.
And you agree that each atom is physically identical.
No.
Well, that is a law of chemistry and physics.
No. but you're using identity. You're not using it in the numerical sense. There's something called numerical identity, and
I'm
nothing.
using. I believe I'm using numerical identity.
Numerical identity just means every property.
Yes, and that's what I'm using it.
Are
That's
these
exactly what I mean.
Okay, are these numerically identical?
No, but they could be.
If there could be, then there would only be one. There wouldn't be two.
No. That's not true. There are, like, we can have two photons that are exactly identical in every single way. They are not. There's no property that you could.
They would be the same photon. They would be like
No, they
there wouldn't be
wouldn't.
two photons.
They
Then
would
there
not
would not
be.
be two photons.
They would not be. I assure you, they would not.
How can something be numerically identical to another thing and there be two different ones? Because remember, what numerical identity means is that if A is numerically identical to B, there is no difference.
Yes,
but if you're saying they're two, but if you're saying they're two different ones, that's contradictory.
No, they're two identical ones.
Two,
they cannot be distinguished.
I don't understand.
The fact that they cannot be distinguished. Look, like, this is how you know that they're not distinguished. If you switch places, can you determine if they switched places?
If I saw them being switched, yeah.
If you didn't see them being switched.
Look, the fact that they're switched. Okay, now this is enough to kind of I think understand what's going on here. If they're switching places, that means they had different locations.
Yeah, but you can have different locations. That's fine.
Okay, if they're different locations, then there's a difference. But numerical identity is that there is no difference.
There's not a difference if they're at different locations. If those locations
are like, there's not a difference if they have different locations.
Yes.
Slow down think about what you're saying, because I'm saying something that's not controversial.
I'm aware of what I'm saying here. That, like, the actual like the okay. So space and time are scale invariant. So, like, there isn't going to be any difference, like, if it's in this space or if it's in this space, as long as the forces acting them are the same. Like, they have the same force of gravity, the same, like, general properties in the space around them. If they're identical, like, then there is no difference if they're at this space or at this space. Like, there is no discernible difference.
Okay, but the discernible difference is different than just difference, right? Because now what you've done is you've reduced the notion of identity to what we can discern, but that's not how identity works, right? What if A is identical to B, numerically speaking, it doesn't matter what we can discern and what we can't. Okay, the idea is that if there are two different locations, okay, of two objects, then those cannot be numerically identical because there are two different locations. Because remember,
I really don't think that that's how space works. Like, like, physically, I don't think that is how space works. I think that space is invariant. So, like, if you're at one part of space, it's the same as being in another. Like, that
doesn't make sense to me. I don't know what you're saying.
Well, I can always just get around this problem because I already used the example of the photons, and photons can actually occupy the exact same space right on top of each other without being.
I'm fine with that. I think that there can be two different things in the same locality.
But even if they're identical by all properties.
No, they're not going to be identical.
Well, then what property could possibly distinguish them? If they're two photons that are identical in the same space.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Think of a statue and a lump of let's say clay. Okay, the idea is that the lump of clay that makes up the statue is in the same location as the statue. The lump of clay has always existed, but the statue is one that's been created. So there you have two different things: the lump of clay and the statue that occupy the same location, even though they're not the same thing.
But they weren't identical. They're not identical.
Yeah, they're not identical. I'm just proving to you.
I'm saying that the photons are identical. Like, I'm just saying that this is how particles.
Well, then you're not talking about two different photons. You're talking about one photon, not two.
I'm not, though.
Okay, I don't know how else to.
I guess maybe we're talking past each other a little bit. In the comments here, we see Leo says that Danny is not speaking to the physics of space-time here. I'm talking about the physics. Maybe that's why we're speaking past each other. Titan says that is definitionally how space works. Nephilim says that Danny's hypotheticals are impractical, but honestly, I would say that my hypotheticals have been totally impractical all night. So
I think you gave good examples. I think I just don't. I mean, the notion of numerical. There are different types of identities. There's type identity. There's relative identity. There's different types of identities out there. When I say that you and I are the same, right? That's a type of identity where we're just saying we're like maybe the same species, right? Or something like that.
This is what I mean. I
Okay.
can explain what I mean when I say identical, right? If two objects are identical, they can swap places without any difference at all. And if they can swap places and there is no property that is different about anything, then they are identical.
Okay, I just don't think you're using the same notion of identity as I am. I think this notion of numerical identity rules out that possibility. And so maybe we're thinking because I would say these are identical, but not numerically identical.
Let me ask. Here, let's go for a tiebreaker here. Okay, I'm gonna ask ChatGPT. See what it says as a little tiebreaker for this discussion. So I'll just ask it. Can two fundamental particles be identical?
Be numerically identical. Yeah.
Can two fundamental particles be numerically identical? I'm just curious about what it says. I'm not going to be taking its word as gospel. But, okay, according to the principles of quantum mechanics, two fundamental particles of the same type, such as electrons or protons, are considered indistinguishable and cannot be numerically identical in the way that classical objects can be. I don't really get that sentence, but it just says, therefore, two fundamental particles may be indistinguishable and share the same properties. They cannot be numerically identical in the way classical objects can be because their wave functions must obey certain mathematical constraints. So
it can't be numerically identical.
I guess I suppose that you would be right. I'll have to look into, I guess, why they wouldn't be numerically identical.
Because you're tying identity to discernibility of humans, right? Those are different things. Right. I think your notion of identity has to do with discernibility, and that's not what numerical identity is.
Yeah. Then maybe it's just a confusion on my part of numerical identity. Maybe, but yeah. So this has been a really interesting discussion. I'm not sure if you wanted to move on to talk about natural selection at all.
We can talk about natural selection, but you, everyone in chat that knows me, Leo, you would put a beware sign, right, when it comes to me talking about natural selection, right? Leo's been one of the most I don't think he accepts the argument, but he's been one of the few that's taken the time to understand it. I think he may not get it right now because it's been a while, but at one point I think he understood what I was trying to say. Yeah.
So I'm essentially entering in blind to this. Okay. So I was not aware of any of the past history or any previous streams or discussions about this. So I've got no idea what I'm in for. So, but I'm open to I want to genuinely understand like where you're coming from with it.
So, okay, a couple things. What I'm not doing. I'm not undermining evolutionary biology in terms of the empirical claims they made about our evolutionary history and other organisms' evolutionary history. Common ancestry is totally fine. I think they do a stellar job at putting together a narrative that I think was completely reasonable to accept and very, very, very likely true. So I'm no creationist. I'm no theist. I'm not undermining the body of knowledge, specifically empirical knowledge of what evolutionary biologists have brought on the table. But there is. I can just give the argument, but the problem is that the original formulation of the argument uses a lot of philosophical jargon. So I'm going to try to use an example. Okay. So let's say you have a breeder. Okay. Breeder of dogs.
Okay.
And this breeder has been working through multiple generations. So let's say we're at the like F20 generation. So 20 generations later after the original parents. Okay. And as you have these different generations, right? You have a lot of phenotypic changes and all this stuff. And let's say that the breeder knows what he's doing. Okay. Let's just stipulate that. And then you look at the most recent generation and you notice that all the dogs have long golden hair.
Mm-hmm.
Long golden hair. So now the hair that is long and the hair that is golden, this is the same trait, right? They're referring to the same trait, right? The hair that is golden, okay? Now which one was the relevant one that that was being selected for? What would you do? Or was
Well,
both being selected for?
I would make an experiment where we see how it would be affected if the dogs had long hair that was not golden.
Oh, take in mind that we're dealing with a breeder here. Don't forget we're dealing with a breeder.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I would construct an experiment that would isolate one of the variables, either the color, the goldenness,
Uh-huh.
or the length, and I would see which one is the one that's increasing in allelic frequency over time. If it's the length of the hair, or if it's the color, by isolating them between the two.
Okay,
So,
let's just stipulate you can't do that. What else can you do? You might be right. Maybe you could do that, but what could you do? I mean, the answer seems to be you asked the breeder. What were you going for? Did you want long hair, golden hair, or both? Or did you not want neither?
well, that would be artificial selection, not natural
Yeah,
selection.
we're talking about a breeder.
Okay, so sorry, I was misunderstanding you.
Oh,
I
my bad.
thought, I
Okay.
thought the breeder was trying
This
to
is
figure
not
out
an example
what
of natural selection.
was asking.
Yeah, this is not an example of natural selection. I'm
Okay,
starting
okay.
with artificial selection.
Then
So
yeah, sure, you asked the breeder.
that was my fault. Yeah. So you asked the breeder. The
Yeah.
breeder says, told you that he desires the golden hair. Could care less about whether it was short or long hair. Okay.
Okay.
So here within artificial selection, there's a distinction, right,
Sure.
between what was selected for and what was right along.
Okay.
Okay. Now, of course, the breeder could have said, I wanted both, and which both of them are being selected for.
Yeah.
But in this case, we'll stipulate that the breeder wanted wanted golden hair,
Sure.
could care less about the length of the hair. So here we have a distinction between selection for and selection of. Okay. So that's the first distinction.
Wait. In that example, the selection for would be the golden hair, and selection of was the long hair, because they just selected it because it was like a byproduct of what they actually
Yeah,
wanted.
exactly. It's
Okay.
called, I think the fancy word is called a spandrel or ride
Okay.
along.
I just had to make sure that I was on the same page.
You're on the same page, right? Now, what's interesting is that did you have to perform an experiment to figure that out? You offered an experiment, but you didn't have to, because there is something with
Yes.
what we call propositional content, which is content that can distinguish between descriptions. Okay, content that's made up of things that, so like our beliefs and desires are propositional. I want an ice cream, right? This can that's propositional. Okay, it has content, meaningful content in it, I guess is what you could say, semantic content. Okay, and that content can differentiate between spandrels and the trait of interest. In other words, it can differentiate between selection for and selection of, because it is the desire for golden hair picks out the golden, it's going for the golden hair, and it's ignoring, is indifferent, so to speak, to the length of the hair. Okay. Now imagine that there's a law that for any a law of selection. The law of selection is saying that in any environment, if there's any kind of dog population in a natural environment, so we just kicked out the breeder. Okay, no breeder. Breeder's gone. Okay, but I'm making up a law. Okay, the law says for any environment, if dogs are proliferating in population, generational time, or whatever, that if there's golden hair, that is what the environment is selecting.
Okay.
Right. So then you go around the wilderness and you see a bunch of dogs that have all golden hair and long hair. Now, given that law, you can know which one is being selected for and which one is the ride along, right? Given that law. So laws, just like minds or breeders, also have propositional content to be able to disambiguate between spandrels and the traits of interest, selection for and selection of. So minds and theories and laws all have semantic content to help us. When we look at an observation, we can make up, this is what's being selected for, and that's what's being selected up, right? So I give you the case of a breeder. We can use the breeder's content, propositional content, to disambiguate those two traits without an experiment. Same with the law. Okay. Now, let's say we don't have any laws. Let's say we have no breeders. And let's say you couldn't experiment. Okay. What in that environment, could we know which one is being selected for and which one is going to be just merely selected of?
Well, since you've said that we can't have an experiment, I mean,
Right.
my normal go-to would just be.
I'm going to agree with you. That's how we would do it. Okay. But could we, independent of an experiment, appeal to anything else to disambiguate the traits?
I want to say that you could appeal to like deductive reasoning, as like, so this would only apply in certain examples, right? But like, if you could propose a reasonable, rational mechanism that would account for why the golden trait would be selected, but there is no mechanism that would be able to select for the length, then I think that you could reason that like the trait that's being selected for is the goldenness. But yeah, that's going to be obviously
But
context.
wouldn't it depend on the locality? Like if you were in the environment,
It's going to be context dependent,
right?
yeah.
It's going to be context dependent. This is my point, that you did not. You appealed to a kind of experiment to deconfound the traits. You did not appeal to a unified theory or mechanism that is called natural selection. And so what I'm trying to say is that natural selection does nothing to help us to be able to distinguish between selection for and selection of. There are only three things that can help us in this context, right? Minds, the breeder, laws, which there are no laws of selection, right? And deconfounding traits by doing experiments. Okay.
I mean, I would say that like the reason that there's no generalized law of selection in that regard is because the effects of selection are, or the effects of natural selection are going to be dependent on the environment. So if the environment is different, then the selection pressures are different. So you can't really have a generalized like set of laws because there is no generalized environment.
Yeah, and okay, so I would agree. Agree. This is, but the idea is that natural selection is not a unified mechanism or unified theory, right? By which you can appeal to disambiguate selection for and selection of. You have to appeal to a mind. You have to appeal to a theory with the content to disambiguate the traits, or you're just going to have to run an experiment.
So
right?
what about okay, let me know if this would be what you're referring to, right? So would it be selection of non-coding, non-functional areas of the genome that are not phenotypically relevant? So they're not even visible to natural selection. They don't have any impact on fitness or phenotype. But it would still be true, correct me if I'm wrong, but it would still be true that they would be selecting like, they would be like selected of those.
Yeah, a lot of, like, you're talking about
phenotypes.
junk DNA, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so like the junk
Yeah.
DNA would be a part of the genotype that would be being selected, but we would be able to know that natural selection is not selecting for junk DNA genotypes because it's invisible to natural selection.
Now, yeah, okay. So I would use I'm okay with that talk, but I think yeah, I agree that it seems like, unless I'm corrected by scientists, junk DNA is just not being selected for, or it's not even being selected against. It's just riding along.
It's a subject of like genetic drift would be the only thing. So it's just like stochastic and random, like the processes that affect it.
Okay,
but it's
and
not visible to natural selection.
So the first thing is that you're talking like natural selection does something, and I'm wondering what's being meant, because if all you're saying is that the environment,
Yes.
If natural selection is honest with the environment, an environment is not the theory, right? Like, it's not the mechanism that extends between various localities, right? What evolutionary biologists, especially, what Darwin was trying to say, is that he discovered something unique in the environment, right? Called natural selection, that is a mechanism of change in phenotypes across generational time. And that
wouldn't natural
it's not like he
selection,
discovered the environment, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
but wouldn't natural selection just be the mechanism by which the environment like affects these living organisms? I mean, that would just be the mechanism that the environment operates with.
Okay, but then that's okay. So then you can have, then here's my puzzle with that, right? I'm fine to use that kind of talk, right? But what's going on here is that if you have two different localities with two very different types of
Yes.
organisms, right? The
Yes.
mechanism in one locality might be of selection, let's say,
Uh-huh.
is going to be might be very different than the other one from a different locality.
Yeah.
But if you're both calling that natural selection,
Yes.
then you're committed by transitivity to say that those mechanisms are identical, but they're not. Because
why
you're
would we
saying
have
natural
to?
selection occurs in both. Like, think about insulin, for example. Okay, so you know, I drank this. Let's say you ate a candy bar. There's now the release of insulin is a mechanism by which I can point that is identical between our bodies, not numerically identical, but identical between our bodies to say that there's a unified mechanism between us when it comes to when we let a lot of sugar loose in our bloodstream, right? But so that's what I understand to be some kind of unified mechanism, something that's identical between two different systems, my body, your body, insulin's identical in some kind of relative way. And but when you look at natural selection in the way that you've characterized it, the mechanisms are so different, they can't be identical. The mechanisms are identical, but yet they're saying that natural selection is some kind of unified mechanism across localities when there's selection for.
So let me do my own analogy here, right?
Okay.
So if we talk about the process of throwing, so say
Process of
we
what?
throwing something like an
Okay.
object. So say we have like a water bottle, and I throw mine underhand, and you throw yours overhand. We both threw the same object, but the mechanism that we did it was different. I went underhand, you went overhand, whatever.
The hand, the
So
arm.
I would say like we both threw the water bottle, but
Yeah, but
like,
the
they were not
unifying
identical.
mechanism is the arm.
Well, I would say like the mechanism, like the process is throwing, right? The mechanism was not identical.
The mechanism is
So,
identical. Look, take a catapult and let launches a projectile, and
well,
me launching a projectile. They're
yeah,
both is projectile launching, but the
yes,
mechanisms are different. The catapult
yes,
and the hand are different.
yes. I'm
Okay.
agreeing with that. I'm
Okay.
saying that natural selection is the process of throwing, and the exact mechanism is just the different ways in which that throwing was enacted. So just because they're all throwing does not mean that the mechanism is identical. So like throwing is the umbrella term, just like
Okay.
natural selection is the umbrella term for a bunch of different mechanisms that would all fall under natural selection.
I sort of yeah, and I think I should be careful here with how we're using the term mechanism, and so I'm guilty of this too, because sometimes we refer to mechanisms as like this is a mechanism of writing. That's slightly different than the way when the release of insulin to the storage of sugar, that's in a mechanism, that's a process. So I'm fine with using mechanism to refer to a process or like an entity. And what you're saying is that natural selection is not like a substance or a thing, an object, so much as it is a description of a process that occurs when that process has to do with fitness or whatever, right? But even
Yeah.
so, you have the same problem, right? The process of selection in one locality might be very different than the other process of another locality, and the only unifying thing that you have is something quite trivial, that natural selection becomes a process having to do with fitness, right? And so and that is what work does that do in our explanatory schemes of evolutionary biology to say because the idea is that what a mechanism can do, or theory at that, right, is something that we can appeal to help us in explaining the world, or at least the biological world. If natural selection reduces something, same process that is conducive to fitness, then that does zero for us, right? That's why Fodor quoted, the theorists are smarter than this theory. This theory of natural selection, or this mechanism of natural selection, actually does very little to help us in putting together our narratives in evolution.
I don't understand why you would say that though, because I do think that it adds utility, like understanding that the interaction between an environment and the population of organisms is going to be mediated by natural selection. does allow us to make predictions or to understand population dynamics in like a sophisticated way, by like understanding that like, hey, like these are selection pressures that are particular to this environment. Like,
Mhm.
say there aren't any fruit is available like below 6 feet on a tree. That would be a selection pressure that, if we were aware of it, we would understand how that selection pressure would affect the fitness of a population. If, half of them are over 6 feet and half of them are under, then we know what kind of dynamics will play out as a result of natural selection due to those selection pressures in the environment. So I do think that an understanding of natural selection can add utility and allow us to make predictions.
Yeah, but okay, one of the when we're talking about natural selection, we're talking about fitness, we're talking about deleterious traits, either one, right? Selection against and selection for, as distinguished
Yeah.
from selection of,
Yeah.
right? And the point is that does natural selection, as is understood in any biology book or text, right, help us differentiate between selection for and selection of? Can it tell the difference? And if it does, then it's got
Yeah.
to have propositional content. And it has no natural selection has no propositional content to disambiguate between selection for and selection of, like in the case of a bona fide theory or law of science, or in the case of a mind. And we're ruling out minds. There is no God. We're
Well, I
heathens
think,
here.
okay, so this propositional content, I'm a little bit uneasy, like iffy about what you mean by that. So, can we use the example that I laid out with like the trees, where all the fruit is only available at 6 feet, and you have a certain type of population in this environment that can only eat that fruit, and half of them can reach it, and half of them can't. So it seems to me that in that scenario, we would be able to understand what the propositional content would be like, would be, the height of the organism. That's what's being selected for, is the height.
Yeah, I think what's going on there is that we can know what's being. So let me understand your hypothetical. So you have a type of tree that only produces fruit at a certain altitude, right? Is that
No,
what
like
you're saying?
the tree, like there's no branches that are below 6 feet on the tree.
Oh, okay. So then that means that only certain organisms are going to be able to reach the fruit or
Yes,
climb, whether
yes.
it be birds,
Only
the
the organisms that are tall enough,
or
or
can
like
fly or
reachable
whatever.
by any means. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's.
And I think also Stupid Horror Energy is in the chat, and she brings up, sorry to derail it, but I thought she brought
Mhm.
up a good point about like multiple regression analysis can be used to find out which traits that selection was selecting for versus which traits were just like correlational.
Yeah, yeah,
So
and I'm fine with saying biologists do a great job deconfounding the traits experimentally, and they create models to do so.
yeah,
But they just don't appeal to this theory that Darwin came up with, or what the adaptationists have in mind when they're thinking of natural selection. They come there's stuff that we have in making predictions today that are new and innovative, like predator prey models and all this stuff. Like, but that has nothing to do with the adaptationist program, right? Where natural selection is understood as this mechanism, this unified
mhm.
mechanism, right? And so I'm not saying that you can't distinguish them. In fact, earlier I said that there are three things that you can do: run an experiment, right? Appeal to a law or appeal to a mind. When you run your experiments, you can generalize statistically from these experiments,
Mhm.
right? So if you're working in the desert and you run experiments about whether short fur or tan fur, is conducive to fitness, right? You can then, after running experiments and studying populations, you can generate models and statistics and all this stuff to say to where when you come to a new species that you've never come across in the desert, and they have tan fur, well, it's likely that that is being selected for, right?
Yeah.
But there you have not appealed to a theory. You've appealed to a collection of data as produced by all these deconfounding experiments that you did and your peers did over the last 30, 40 years in that locality.
Well,
You do not.
how have you not appealed to a theory? That's what I don't understand, though. I mean, to me, it's still appealing to a theory to say, well, we've been really studying this environment, and we understand that environments like this have these selective pressures, like to them. So then, if we go to a new environment, we could say that like our theory would like the framework of our theory would have like these types of environments would have these types of pressures which should produce these types of effects on a population. So to me, that's the with it that's appealing to a framework of a theory.
Yeah, I think that some people have something different in mind talking about scientific theory, because
So like what about like what is different about like why would that not be a scientific theory? I don't get it.
scientific theories have placeholders. So placeholders could be alleles, they could be mass, it could be acceleration, it could be certain types of frictional forces. They have
Hmm.
placeholders, right, that you can draw from to make even mathematical predictions, right? Force equals mass times acceleration is an example. Let's just use that simple example, even though I understand Newtonian physics a little bit obsolete and it's just practical at this point. But the point is that there are placeholders in the theory or in the law
Hmm.
that you can generalize from, and it's not like I mean, there are statistical law, like 30% of the time you have an alpha particle being emitted for every 10 seconds. You could have like probabilistic laws, and I'm fine with that too. But saying that just to make just if you're able to make predictions, that doesn't mean you're making predictions from a scientific theory. I can make predictions that the toilet paper will run out if another pandemic comes through, right? And that could be very well supported, right? We have tons of data to suggest what happens when people enter disaster in a crisis, whether it be pandemics or hurricanes, right? Toilet paper runs out. Have we
Hmm.
appealed to a theory of disasters, a scientific one?
Hmm.
No, right? And so we can even model what will happen if a similar type of pandemic runs through the United States. And in fact, big merchandisers, there's a better word for this, people that produce things like essential, like toiletries, can even
Wholesalers.
model these things, right?
Yeah.
But are they utilizing a scientific theory when they're saying we need about 1 million rolls of toilet paper? No, right? Unless you're watering the notion of theory it's so watered that Walmarts are coming up with scientific theories when they've calculated how much product they need for a certain type of disaster.
So my understanding is like the theory is explaining the mechanism where like a law is maybe closer to what you're referring to of like if we had a law of toilet paper disasters and our law stated that every single time there was a COVID pandemic, then we run out of toilet paper. That sounds like you're postulating a scientific law. And then the scientific theory would be explaining the mechanism by which a pandemic causes um, a loss of toilet paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then that mechanism would allow us to make predictions where, like, well, if we had a pandemic like this, but we change this aspect, that should result in us not running out of toilet paper. And if that is indeed what happens, then that lends evidence that your theory about what was causing the mechanism of the toilet paper to deplete was correct. And I would say that that is a scientific methodology to go about things.
Okay. So we're distinguishing between scientific theory and scientific law. There might be a distinction there, but how I understood the scientific theory is that it depends on laws if they're not the same thing.
So I guess the main sorry to cut you off, but I was just gonna say an example. There's the
Uh-huh.
law of gravity, like Newton's laws of gravitation, and then there's the theory of gravity,
Mm-hmm.
which is still kind of an open question. We don't exactly understand everything about gravity. We have the laws, we know the laws works, but the actual mechanism and like what gravity is on a quantum level is anyone's guess. So we still don't have a working theory, even though we do have working laws.
Right. I'm fine to distinguish these, but it seems like theories are parasitic. They depend on the notion of laws.
They have to have explanatory power to be able to explain. I don't know if every theory has to be able to explain laws, but they do have to be able to explain like observable outcomes or
Okay,
measures.
let's think about maybe theory as applied to history or even natural history, right? So there's a theory out there that about dinosaur extinction, and you might know more of this than me. Is there a theory out there, or
About why the dinosaurs went extinct?
a scientific theory?
Yeah. I mean, I think the most common one is the impact hypothesis, but it's multivariable.
All right.
I think the consensus is that it's multivariate, but like
Okay.
probably
Okay.
the biggest number one cause is that people are cite is the impact.
Do you distinguish between a scientific theory and just because think about theory in that context versus like theory with respect to gravity, and then there's historical theories outside of the natural history, like
Yeah. I would just define a theory as a reified hypothesis.
a reified. When I think of reification, you're taking something abstract and you're like,
So I'm just saying, like, if it's been supported by evidence, then it moves away from a hypothesis to a theory. So either
okay.
the hypothesis has allowed us to make predictions that have been validated, or there's some other kinds of supporting evidence beyond just like the hypothesis
All right.
level.
Okay.
It has
I'm
it
fine with
basically
this.
it's a hypothesis that has gone through the scientific method at least one, if not multiple lines through. So it's gotten stronger every time. Like you go hypothesis, like observation, experiment, results, conclusion, then back to you've strengthened your hypothesis into more than just a hypothesis. It's a theory.
Yeah, I can work with this. So you're saying that a hypothesis generates predictions. We go and verify those predictions.
Yeah.
And maybe after a certain amount of time, a certain level of verification, significant level of verification, it assumes to a theory.
Yeah.
What predictions does natural selection make to verify?
So, like I said, it can show us, like it can make predictions about population dynamics over time. So, like if like in the example
Well, give
of,
me your definition of natural selection, and let's see if it predicts anything.
so I would just say that natural selection is basically the mechanism by which the environment impacts the allele frequencies of a population.
Say that again.
It's like the mechanism by which the environment impacts the allele frequencies of a
But that's
population.
consistent with genetic drift.
So the environment is not necessarily impacting the like genetic drift. Genetic drift is a
The
result.
environment can certainly impact.
That's true. I mean, I will say you can have like founding effects and things like that, but
right.
in terms of like the environment I'm talking about, they would be like fitness effects. So if something does not affect fitness, then it's not going to affect the way that the population interacts with
What
the
are
environment.
predictions generated from natural selection that you think could disconfirm? Oh, what are some observations that could disconfirm natural selection? I'm just curious.
So, like in our example where we had like the trees, right? Where like the only food in an environment was available was 6 feet up in the air from in these trees. Then if what we observed was that there was no impact on height in any of the allele like in any of the populations, there was no impact over time of any kind of change in the allele frequencies of height, then I would say like either we're missing a variable or natural selection did not work.
No, but I'm not asking how do we identify whether natural selection acts in a locality. I'm asking, is there anything that would undermine the theory or the hypothesis as a whole?
Yeah, if it failed to make predictions like that were
Well, yeah.
true.
What observation could I observe in an ecology that would basically disconfirm it as a unifying mechanism or theory or hypothesis, whatever you want to say?
Well, I think I just went through the example, right? I mean, with like the
No, but
tree height.
there could just be an alternate mechanism, right? And it doesn't mean
Yes.
that natural selection doesn't occur in some other locality. So I'm asking, is there any set of predictions that would make it such that natural selection as a mechanism or a hypothesis can be ruled out entirely? Think of a theory, the theory that you appealed to with the dinosaurs, right? If we saw no craters on Earth, that would disconfirm that that theory of dinosaur extinction,
Yeah.
right? That would be something that we could just throw it away. We would throw away the hypothesis.
Yeah.
could we observe that would completely throw away natural selection as a hypothesis or a theory or a mechanism, a unified mechanism?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like if the selection pressures in the environment that are noticeable, are evident, are not affecting the allele changes over time in a population. If there's no correlation, if there's no interaction at all between those two things, if they are not correlated at all, then the selection pressures of the environment, i.e., what would be doing the natural selection, is not doing natural selection. The mechanism is not at play. If the allele frequencies are not changing in a way that is at all correlated with the environment, like selection pressures. You know
Maybe
what I
I
mean?
don't understand your answer, but maybe this, am I? Do you think that at some point natural selection was a hypothesis and not a theory?
Sure. I mean, like, I would think Charles Darwin probably came up with the hypothesis, went and looked at the Galapagos and saw evidence that, like, hey, wait, this makes logical and empirical sense. That, like, if
Okay, so
if the creatures cannot reach the food, they're gonna die if they can't find any other food.
but how does that? Okay, so look, there's this hypothesis of natural selection. Darwin, what before he saw the Galapagos Islands, what predictions did observation did he in mind to that could in principle undermine the hypothesis before he goes to the Galapagos?
I mean,
And other,
I think natural selection just makes sense on an intuitive level. Like, if I have, like, there's a bunch of dogs with really, really thick fur versus a bunch of dogs with really, really thin fur, and they're up in a tundra environment, a very cold environment, I think everybody understands what natural selection is going to do. We can understand the concept of natural selection as saying there are certain selection pressures, like the cold temperature would be a selection pressure, and it's going to
but
affect
do you
those
understand my
two.
question? My question is, what in the Galapagos Islands would undermine that there is this mechanism, natural selection, that occurs in ecosystems? What would he have to see?
The environment.
Okay, if he went to the Galapagos and saw no life, would his hypothesis be undermined?
Well,
No,
it
there
would
is
not be relevant
nothing.
to his hypothesis. His hypothesis is not relevant, is not undermined. It's like, if I hypothesize about gravity and then I go drink a glass of water, is my hypothesis underlined? It's just they're not related. They're non sequiturs. If you're going to go look for evidence of natural selection and you go to a place with no life, it doesn't support or undermine your hypothesis.
You understand that what I'm trying to point out is that there's nothing in principle, unlike the case of the theory of the meteor with the dinosaurs extinction. There
Yeah.
is something in principle that if we were Martians, right, and someone was saying, "Hey, there we used to have these creatures,"
But
and
I
we can,
told you what would disprove it, though.
what on the Galapagos would disprove it?
Okay. So
What specifically?
you understand what I mean when I say, like, changes in allele frequencies over time in a population.
Yes.
You follow that?
Mhm.
So if we are that's what we're observing. That's our measurement. So if we are analyzing how allele frequencies change over time in a given population in a given environment, and we notice that those allele frequencies have nothing to do with any of the natural environmental pressures of, like, that we would think
Nothing to do with
in the
fitness.
natural selection should be affecting this population. But if we determine that natural selection is not having any effect on the allele frequency shifts, then that would undermine, like, that would undermine the theory of natural selection.
Is natural selection a unified hypothesis? Because look, here we want to differentiate between these two cases, right? We want to differentiate between, if I'm wondering if there's a horse in my garage, right? That generates certain expectations and certain predictions. I can imagine there's all sorts of things that would just confirm that
Yes, yes.
hypothesis,
The
right?
same here.
Yeah, but you see, the hypothesis that there's a horse in my garage is not a scientific hypothesis.
Why not? It's a scientific hypothesis to me.
Okay, so now, okay, I think we're just talking past each other then in terms of what I mean
I
by
think any
hypothesis.
hypothesis would be a scientific hypothesis. What makes it a scientific hypothesis is that you do the scientific method on that hypothesis. That's what makes it a scientific hypothesis. So like,
Okay, so when I go and check,
yes.
if there's a dragon in my garage, I'm doing science.
Yeah, if you're going through the scientific method of hypothesis, observation, like
Hmm.
you're either confirming or denying your hypothesis. I mean, that's going through the scientific method.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's just a really watered down notion of science. I mean, but I guess I'm fine with that notion of science. I mean, I now I see where you're coming from. That means that we've so but I'm interested in the theory, right? So the idea is that you're saying theories come from hypotheses, right?
Yep.
But not all hypotheses can graduate to the notion of theory. And what I consider to
Sure.
be a scientific hypothesis is something that could, in principle, become a theory. My hypothesis that there's
Mm.
my hypothesis that there's a horse in my garage cannot rise to the level of a scientific theory. I'm interested. The point is that is natural selection something that can rise to the level of theory? I mean, Gould said that, you know,
So no, I would reject this notion because I think that there are scientific hypotheses that definitionally will never rise to the level of theory. For example, um, we might make a certain scientific hypothesis based on our observations, like, hey, this exoplanet seems like it has a magnetic field. So our hypothesis might be that it has like internal geodynamo effects. That would be like a scientific hypothesis. But if we verified it, then it doesn't. It's not like it can become a theory. It cannot become an explanatory framework, a mechanism for these things.
right,
So, but
right.
it was still a scientific hypothesis when we
Okay,
postulated.
okay. I'm only interested in the type of scientific hypothesis that can, in principle, become a theory, which I take you to think. I think of natural selection in this way. Natural selection isn't akin to the type of hypothesis like, is there a horse in my garage? Right? It's special in the sense that it can and it has, according to the body to scientists, risen to the level of theory. Right?
Yep.
So the idea then is that um okay, so let me think about my original question. Okay, so we have a type of hypothesis in mind now. It's just not any kind of hypothesis. It's kind of a unifying hypothesis of how ecosystems work. Okay, and I'm wondering how, in principle, could the hypothesis be undermined? Okay. And you're saying that, well, if Darwin went to the Galapagos and saw that there was a change in allelic frequencies, not as a result of the fitness of let's say the beaks. And of course he didn't know anything about allele. Uh, but the phenotypic, there's a
Yeah.
distribution of, yeah, but there's trait frequencies, right? Trait
Yes.
percentages, and he studies the generations across 30 years or whatever, and notices that these trait percentages are changing, but cannot discern that it's because those traits are conducive to survival, reproduction, or whatever.
Yeah.
How does that undermine? How would that undermine the entire the unified hypothesis of natural selection? I just don't see it.
Well, because natural selection would be saying that the change in the frequencies of the like phenotypic traits is going to be a result of adapting to selection pressures. So, like if Darwin observed that like all the birds were getting food from these flowers,
Mhm.
and then he observes that the flowers get longer, but he doesn't observe that the birds' beaks get any longer. He doesn't observe any discernible change in the length of the birds' beaks. Then, yeah, it seems like that natural selection, like the selection
As a
pressures,
unified hypothesis.
yeah, then the selection pressures would not have had any impact on the the traits of the birds.
Okay, so here's the problem I'm seeing. Um, there are cases of genetic drift, right? Which could mimic the data that we might see in natural selection, right? But there, the traits, the distribution is changing not as a result of the traits being conducive to survival and reproduction. So we agree that there are those cases, right? So let's say
I
there was a
I
case.
think I don't know. I'll agree for sake of argument.
Well, you don't think genetic drift occurs?
No, I do think genetic drift
That's all
occurs. I
I'm
just
describing.
don't know if it could be confused with like
The point is that when you
real
compare natural
frequency.
selection, the data of the frequency distribution among a case of genetic drift and natural selection, they could look very similar, right?
I don't know. I don't know if I can agree with that, but I will say this: like, allele frequencies can change due to other mechanisms besides natural selection,
Okay, yeah, okay. And
such
here
as genetic drift.
I'm trying to, yeah, but let me just, I want clarity on this. I kind of do. I don't want, you're granted it to me, but I want to make sure I don't. The point is that in case of genetic drift, there could be a trait that moves to fixation, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I need, right? So and then you end up discovering that it's not because of fitness, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's say Darwin got unlucky, okay, and he has this hypothesis, unified hypothesis that could potentially be this big theory in
Yeah.
biology, and he goes to an environment, not the Galapagos, and starts studying a population which so happens to be an instance of genetic drift. And he, over 30 years and whatever, he does the same kind of studies he would have done in the Galapagos. He comes to this, these traits moving to fixation. It has nothing to do with fitness. Is the hypothesis undermined? His hypothesis undermined?
Well, if the traits had nothing to do with fitness, then obviously not, because those traits moving to fixation would not have impacted fitness. So it would not have impacted any part of that equation of like natural selection. Because on the one hand, you've got an organism's fitness, and on the other hand, you've got selection pressures. So it's all about matching the selection pressures with the fitness. So if the traits involved are not affecting the fitness, then they're not affecting any of the aspects of natural selection. So
I'm confused. So, so I'm asking if he went to an ecology and there was no, and the allelic frequencies were changing, but not because of anything to do with fitness. So
yeah,
yes or no, would that undermine the unified hypothesis that he wants to graduate to theory? Would that undermine that?
no,
No.
I think
Okay.
because
Okay.
I'm saying that there are multiple mechanisms. It's not like only natural selection can affect allelic frequencies. So
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, if he's just finding evidence of another mechanism like genetic drift, that doesn't undermine or take away from natural selection being able to affect it as well.
Right. So I think the point I'm making is that that there it doesn't matter what Darwin observes in these ecologies, because if it's not consistent with his unified mechanism, it's consistent with some other mechanism. And so,
Well, no, because what you were referring to was only about traits that don't affect fitness. Now, if we were going to look at traits that do affect fitness,
okay,
right? Then you could undermine natural selection, because
how?
if you were getting like traits that were negative to,
Deleterious.
yeah, deleterious to fitness, and they were being fixed, then
And they're moving fixation.
yeah, and they were moving to fixation, then like you could still have that happening, right?
Okay.
But you would have to have an explanation for why that's happening, because those traits, if natural selection is true, those traits should be under negative selection pressure.
Right. But are we bracketing other mechanisms?
What do
Because
you mean by bracketing?
deleterious traits can move to fixation if there are other mechanisms.
Yes. So basically, like if you've gone through any of the potential mechanisms, like you've looked at the
Okay.
population size, you've looked at any founder effects, you've looked at any genetic bottlenecks that could be occurring, and anything that you would have like small population, you've ruled all that stuff out, right? Then there needs to be an explanation. You can't just say there is no explanation, because if there is no explanation for why these deleterious traits are moving to fixation, then natural selection is undermined, because
Okay. Okay. Now I'm gonna, so
there should be a negative selection pressure on those traits. So if they are not behaving as if there is, and if they're achieving fixation, if there's no alternative explanation for why that would be the case, then the natural selection is undermined.
all right. What is a deleterious trait?
Anything that negatively impacts fitness.
What does that mean?
So like fitness is your ability to like optimally conform with the environment in order to maximize reproduction.
So I think that this is logically impossible, right? This is not. This is something that you couldn't, in principle, see, not because of any particular contingent fact, but because it's logically impossible for, if you're putting all else being equal, so we're bracketing all other mechanisms, and we're so there's no other explanations outside that we know about, like, whether it be mutations or whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
Genetic drift. So then, if what a trait that is that moves, what it means to say that there's a fit trait is that trait is conducive to survival, right? Then
Well,
what
not just conducive to survival, but conducive to
survival and
reproduction.
reproduction?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Then by definition, right? If the trait is moving to fixation, that means that those organisms that have that trait, it has to be. It's not deleterious. It can't be deleterious. There's a logical problem here, in other words. Not a scientific one.
Well, no, I mean, I think that, like, if it's moving to fixation, even though it's not, even if it's deleterious to fitness, then natural selection is wrong. If there's no other
Yeah,
explanation.
but that's a definitional problem, right? Because the notion of a deleterious trait as opposed to a fit trait already includes the notion of surviving and reproducing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're saying that if what I'm hearing is that if a deleterious trait moves to fixation, which moving to fixation is just surviving and reproducing, right? As compared to other
Wait, that's not fixation though.
Oh wait, but the organisms that are that have that trait are surviving and reproducing at a greater rate than the So yeah, it is. The notion of fixation already implies survival and reproduction.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that that trait is lending itself to survival or reproduction. Like,
But
you can have slightly deleterious.
But we bracketed all the other mechanisms,
But
right?
you can have slightly deleterious mutations that do achieve fixation due to genetic drift.
Yeah, but we're bracketing that, right? You're saying all else being equal, bracketing all the other mechanisms, right? What would natural selection would be in trouble if we witnessed a deleterious trait move to fixation. But moving to fixation already implies that that means organisms that have that trait are surviving and reproducing more often than the ones that don't, right? That's what it would imply if it's moving to fixation, right? So I just don't see, if you're bracketing all the other mechanisms, that how wouldn't they would just, it seems like it would logically imply that that couldn't be deleterious. Maybe I'm wrong here.
I think that you would, in order to like quantify it as deleterious, you would have to compare it to like the previous populations that didn't have that mutation, I guess.
Okay, maybe we could do this. Can you create a hypothetical? How would you know? How does one know that a trait is deleterious? How would you know?
Well, if it negatively impacts fitness.
How do you know if it negatively impacts fitness?
If it negatively impacts like survivability and reproduction.
Okay, and how do you tell if it's negatively impacting survival and reproduction?
But you can like measure that.
The fixation, whether it moves to fixation or not.
But you can have slightly deleterious things and even deleterious mutations moving to fixation, though. That's the key.
But then, then there would be but without any other, if we're
exactly. There would be confounding variables like a genetic bottleneck or something.
Yeah, if you're bracketing all of that, then I don't know what we're talking about anymore. And
I think that's just because natural selection is true, though. Like, it makes logical sense. Like, I think that you're saying it's illogical for natural selection to not be true. That's what I'm kind of hearing.
Right. That it seems like, to show that natural selection is false, right? I mean, you have to point to a logical impossibility. That's what And then you
Yeah,
have to think about
but
it.
to me, it kind of does seem like a logical impossibility for it to be wrong. Like
Okay, well then,
if you have a cold environment, and then you have like animals that are better able to handle cold and animals that are not, logically, it would be impossible to me for the ones that are not able to survive,
mhm.
for those to be the ones that survive and carry on. Logically, it seems like the ones that are better suited for the environment should be the ones that have the best fitness.
Now I don't know how you're using the word logically, but so I want to stipulate that before I'm uncharitable here.
Okay,
But if natural selection is a logical truth, then it's not a scientific one. Logical
interesting.
truths are not scientific truths because logical truths are necessarily true. Scientific truths are not necessarily true. They can be disconfirmed.
Hmm.
Logical truths are unfalsifiable.
Hmm.
And this is not the essence of Fodor's argument. The essence of Fodor's argument has to do with natural selection is blind to selection for versus selection of. I'm just going on a different route of criticism, by the way. I don't mean to re-representing Fodor here specifically, but there are people that reply to this. Like, for instance, I think it's Elliot Sober, philosopher of science, that criticized Fodor's argument, claimed that natural selection is a definitional and so a logical truth, at least the one that has to do with the sort of like, that all things being equal, if a trait is deleterious or fit, that that makes some predictions about how it moves to fixation compared to one that isn't. That Sober thinks is a definitional truth, and if it's a definitional truth, it's logically true, and there's nothing to falsify it. And that's kind of where I'm going here. Is that what could we observe?
So
And if
what do you think of this? So Titan is saying that logic and science are not mutually
totally
exclusive. So
agree.
the
Point is that
the notion that something being a logical truth means that it cannot be a scientific truth
right.
is
Yeah,
do you
that's true. Yeah, I agree with that. But just mathematical truths aren't scientific truths, right? A logical truth would be something like a bachelor is an unmarried man. It's a logical truth. A is A,
uh-huh.
right?
Would
Um,
that not also be a scientific truth though?
no,
But
because
you could
scientific
go and
truths,
empirically demonstrate that science with
you could
science, right?
empirically demonstrate that some bachelor at some point is, uh, you know, it's impossible for someone to be a bachelor and be a woman, right? That's just
But you
logic.
could also empirically demonstrate that you could go to all the bachelors and you could like I mean it wouldn't be deductive reasoning, it would be inductive, but like you could go out to enough of them and you could do scientific studies of bachelors and then you can get results that show that this is true. So it could be a logical and a scientific truth at the same time, right?
I mean, I think there's a big difference in saying something like, okay, look, I'm fine with saying that you can discover logical truths empirically. That is okay. Like, you can discover
Yeah.
that triangles have three sides,
Okay.
or but once you discover what a triangle is, you have to have built
So
in.
then would we not just say that that natural selection was discovered
But the
like
problem with
scientific?
look, if you discover a logical truth, and it's
Yeah.
hard to, I mean, I'm working with you here. I have to think about it, but um, the point is that logical truths are unfalsifiable and they're necessarily true. Scientific truths are contingent, meaning that they can be true or
Yes.
false and they can be
Yeah.
falsified, right? So we don't want to say, we want to say that a virtuous aspect, a theoretical virtue of a theory is that it can be shown to be false in principle.
Mhm.
And if natural selection can't be shown to be false in principle, then we've got something different on our hands.
Hmm. I mean, I would have to really sit with this and think about it because I still feel like natural selection is falsifiable. Like
Okay.
if you were to measure the allele frequencies and they are not at all correlated with environmental selective pressures, then to me that's like you've falsified the natural selection prediction.
Yeah. Okay. So let's run through that one more time. So you're saying okay, natural selection can be falsified.
Like yeah, you have an environment, you have selection pressures, natural selection would make a prediction about how those selective pressures should affect the population's allele frequencies over time. Now, you measure the way that the allele frequencies shift over time, and you find out that they have not changed in the way that you've predicted using natural selection. To me, you've falsified natural selection's prediction.
What that seems to be saying, I mean, I guess I'm stumped. Can we use an example? Okay. So Darwin uh, was Darwin stripped to the Galapagos. You know about the finches, right? So let's use the finches exact example.
Well, can we just use the dogs, the two populations of dogs in a cold environment? One's got long fur,
Why can't we use
one's
the
got
finches?
short.
Because I want to because this all comes back to Darwin, right? I want to know what you think Darwin was thinking, right?
Okay.
Okay, if you insist, we'll go back to your examples or the examples that we provided earlier.
Okay.
Okay, so the finches, there were so he wanted to know if he can verify his hypothesis of natural selection. What could Darwin observe, do you think, on that island with respect to finches, with respect to the vegetation, and everything? What would he have to observe to say, I need to throw this theory out?
If the variation, if like the phenotypic variation of the finches had absolutely nothing to do with the environmental selection pressures.
Okay. And so if now that could, but that goes back to my
So like if allele frequency change has nothing to do with fitness, natural selection is false.
yeah, but there you're gonna have to put an all else being equal clause. You have to bracket all other mechanisms, and
Sure.
then right.
I
And
mean, yeah, you have to control for other variables. Yeah, it's an experiment.
okay, so if Darwin thought that there was no genetic drift, okay, and there was no mutations, and he didn't know what mutations were, but we'll work with it. And any of the no sexual selection or anything like that. What's the gene flow? Right, then you're saying that natural selection would be falsified in that case.
Yeah. Okay. I think I
Okay.
follow.
Well, I have to think about it. I'm somewhat. Before I continue to argue it, I want to think about it more. But I'm suspicious because I'm wondering if we're creating a logically impossible scenario. I'm wondering, but I'm inclined to say yes, but I honestly have to think about it more.
Well, because the way that like the actual alleles and the genetics work could be in a mechanism that has nothing to do with fitness. The inheritance that organisms receive from like their genes
Hmm.
could follow a mechanism that has absolutely nothing to do with fitness. It could be like, what allele frequencies change over time could have some kind of black box mechanism that has, what did you call it before, like a propositional whatever.
Propositional content.
Yeah, so it
Mhm.
could have a totally different propositional content than natural selection does, and it could be affecting these things in a way that like the allele changes are not occurring at all with any regard to their fitness effects.
All right.
So if
So
that was the case, then natural selection would not be a valid theory because an organism's fitness would not at all impact their allele frequencies in that population.
okay, so let's say you and I are on the what is it? The Beagle, the Teagle, I forgot what is it, whatever.
HMS Beagle.
Yeah, okay. And we get on the shore and we see these finches with larger beaks on one specific island. How do we know that whether that trait is deleterious or fit? Because we have to know that in order to test our natural selection theory.
Yeah. So I think that you would have to measure um like the individuals that have that trait, what is their survivability and reproduction like compared to individuals that lack that trait.
Okay, and how would we tell that? How you and I we're on this island, how would we tell? We would presumably how we would tell. Um, I think I'm starting to see the problem. Okay, I think this is the problem for me. That we're wondering whether the large beak size is fit deleterious or indifferent. Okay. And so to test, we need to first know that to test our hypothesis about natural selection. Right? So the way that we know that that beak is in fact fit rather than deleterious is doing that population study, doing multiple generations and seeing how the trait was. So tell me.
So here's how you would falsify natural selection, right? If you could determine that the characteristics, the genes involved, that you could vary them all and there was no impact on fitness, then natural selection is falsified.
Okay, but how okay, but the first question is that we have to identify the traits that are
Yes.
in fact
So
fit.
if your traits have no impact on your fitness and your reproduction, then natural selection is falsified.
Yeah, but the question I'm asking is how do we know you and I we're testing our natural selection as
So we're counting. We're saying this individual has this trait. How long did they live? How many babies did they have? And you're doing that for every single individual.
What about that data is going to yield deleterious or fit?
So if you find that individuals with this certain trait are surviving longer and having more babies,
how do you tell that?
You're counting that.
Okay, so simply counting them. So if they're more,
I'm counting how many babies is this individual having.
Why would that mean that therefore the trait is more fit?
Because fitness, like definitionally, has to do with how much you're reproducing.
How much you're reproducing and surviving? Yes. Yeah, but
well, you have to survive to reproduce. So reproduction is a good proxy for fitness.
Okay, so that means that I thought earlier, and I could be wrong, please bear with me. I thought you said earlier that if we had a fit trait and we saw it not move to fixation, or if we had a deleterious and we moved to fixation, then that would undermine our hypothesis. But my point is that when we're determining in the first place whether something is fit or deleterious, we're appealing to fixation to determine its fitness or its deleterious status.
Not necessarily, because as I was saying, you're only appealing to the reproduction. So if we noticed that, I'll clarify. So if we noticed that individuals with gene X are having the most babies, but we notice that gene X is not being fixed and the babies don't have gene X, and the inheritance of gene X is totally randomly determined, and then natural selection is falsified.
Okay, the first I guess I'm not quite getting it, but here's on the side note, why doesn't our theory help us in determining what traits are fit or not? Seems like natural selection is in the business of differentiating between
the theory would be the one that's stipulating that fitness would have to do with reproduction.
But it's not like the theory had anything to do. The theory doesn't have any placeholders like beaks and seeds and anything like that, right? It doesn't tell us whether the beak is large beaks are fit or large beaks are deleterious.
Because it's dependent on the environment.
Right. So the theory is
you have to match. You have to match the traits with the environment, and only at the intersection of the two does natural selection tell you what is more fit and what is not.
Look, if the question is how do we determine whether beaks are fit or deleterious, right? And the very theory that's supposed to be picking out fitness over non-fitness doesn't help us, then how does it explain any of it?
Could you repeat that question?
So if there's a question about, well, how do we know that this large beak on this Galapagos particular island is fit or not? And our theory, which is the theory of natural selection, is supposed to differentiate between fit and non-fit traits, right? Yeah. Doesn't reveal to us whether the large beaks are fit or not. Then what does it really explain?
Well, it's because it depends on the environment. So you have to know about your environment. To give you an analogy with this, like we can have a theory of chemistry, like the valence shell, that all chemistry is determined by the number of valence electrons.
Okay.
So if you say, I have this molecule, it's got 4 valence electrons, how is it going to behave? And you say, well, you can't possibly know that because it depends on what the other molecule that it's interacting with is. If that molecule happens to have, 2 electrons, maybe it'll take 2 electrons, or maybe it's got a different electrons, it'll donate electrons. So the behavior of the way that system interacts depends on both of the molecules. The interaction depends on both. If you only have one, you cannot say what the interaction is going to be if you don't know about the other. So with natural selection, you have to have the environment and you have to have the population. And it's the interaction between the two that natural selection would have anything to say about. If you don't know about the environment or you don't know about the allele population, then you can't say anything.
So then what good is the theory? Outside,
Well,
because
what good is the theory of the valence electrons is that it tells you if you
but
have
I'm talking about natural
this
selection.
molecule and you have this molecule, this is how they interact.
Yeah, but
And
so what
the
does
natural selection would tell you if you have these selection pressures and you have this gene pool in the population, this will be the interaction.
No, it doesn't even tell us that.
It does tell us that.
Oh, really?
I'm
Okay,
telling
so
you,
then
if you have
if natural selection, go ahead.
if you have like the dog populations, if you have this cold environment and you have this population of alleles where you have two alleles, short hair, long hair, natural selection will tell us that the long hair alleles will increase in frequency over
How
time.
would it tell us that? Look, I think the Galapagos Island really highlights the problem, right? We go on the Galapagos, we see these finches we've never seen before, and we look at their beaks. Okay. Now
Yeah.
I'm wondering whether though it's deleterious or whether it's fit. They're conducive to fitness, right? And
Look at the environment.
Does natural selection, as the theory, tell us whether it's deleterious fit or just mere selection?
Yeah, if you were looking at the environment, you knew what the selection pressures are.
I'm looking at theory. Is a theory distinguished from the environment?
Yes.
Okay, so just looking at the theory, forget about the environment, right?
No, you cannot forget about the environment. The theory can only help you if you have two factors, the environment and the population. You need both or you can't say anything.
Okay,
you need
fine.
Both.
Okay, fine. So then what about the theory? So, but wait, I'm confused. You're saying the theory is distinct from the environment, right?
The theory is what now?
Distinct from the environment, right?
Yes. The theory is how the environment interacts with the population.
All right. So what about the theory of natural selection tells us about the environment of the Galapagos, right? In a way where, what about, how can, if once we can get all the ecological variables in a row, and we can get our phenotypic traits in a row, but that's not, it's good enough to tell us which phenotypic traits are being selected for.
It is.
No, it's not.
Well, if you know everything about the environment,
I didn't say that.
You know about everything about the phenotypic traits.
I didn't say that. Look,
then natural selection will tell you how those two things will interact with each other.
Okay, so then let's take the Galapagos, right? Yeah. So what we see is we see large nuts, okay, and we see birds with big beaks, okay, and we see trees, we see water, we see a certain set, Galapagos climate, right? Okay. Yes. What does the theory say? And we see the birds have a dark color. We also see that the beaks are shiny. Okay, so we see large, shiny, black finches. All right. So here are our variables. Now, you tell me what the theory gives us now in terms of, is it selecting the shininess? Is it selecting the size of the beak? Is it selecting the black feathers? What is it selecting?
So if we know about the environment, right? We have all the knowledge of the environment. We would know what the selection pressures are. You mentioned that the nuts are difficult to break through. Then we would know that is a selection pressure.
Why? How? Tell me how.
Explaining. In order to get food to reproduce.
No, just appeal to the theory. This is the critical part. Appeal to natural selection to the theory to tell you this.
I am. So in order to reproduce.
Let's put the theory on the screen, and you're going to tell me how you get your information from the theory.
Yeah. So in order to reproduce, the birds are going to have to get the food in those nuts. So they're going to have beaks that are capable of doing that. There's going to be an optimal phenotype for doing that based on the environment, right? What determines what is optimal is completely have to do with the environment. So we can know that the way that population is going to interact in that environment with those selection pressures is that the alleles that are more optimal for cracking those beaks are going to increase in frequency over time.
Okay, here I think this I really appreciate this, because now I'm sort of realizing maybe how to communicate. But could I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, give me a second. I got it. Okay. I'm sharing my screen.
Yep, here we go.
Okay. So let's say okay, so here we have, I'm going to zoom in, don't worry. Okay, so we have, these are the phenotypic traits or phenotypic variables.
Sure.
Okay, these are some ecological variables or environmental variables. So we got climate, warm climate. We got brown nuts, large nuts, shiny beak. Let's do a large beak. Okay. Now, I want you to, in the private chat, to paste me the theory of natural selection. Copy paste it.
What do you mean?
Private chat. I'm going to put it up here. Whatever definition, I'll give you as much time as you need.
Oh, just like a definition of the theory of natural
What
selection?
is the theory, as you understand it? And I don't have. I mean, I have a definition out here somewhere, but it's written and I can't copy paste it. But whatever definition you want.
Yeah, okay. I'll just do I'll just do the first sentence on Wikipedia. Feel like that's probably just fine. Hold on. Where the heck? Oh, private chat. Here we go. That's the first sentence on Wikipedia.
All right. So I'm going to put this on the screen. Okay, so here's an NS. Oh my goodness. I'm going to have to just give me a sec. Okay, good. So now here's what we're wondering. We're on the Galapagos. I want more stuff. Water, salt water, little fresh water. I don't know. I can go all day, but I just kind of want to make it. Here are our observations as naturalists. All right. So now here's our question. Which of these are deleterious? Which of these are fit, or which of them are just right along? Okay. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to determine which ones of these are fit or deleterious just using the theory.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do that?
Yeah, so you'd match the environmental selection pressures to the phenotypes that would be optimal for that set of pressures.
Wait, no. Look, I'm reading. This is the theory. Natural selection is the differential survival and reproduction of individuals due to differences in phenotype. Does this have any content to say whether shiny beaks are being selected for?
Well, because it's a very generalized definition.
Give me the least generalized. Give me something that's useful.
Okay, then the definition that would be useful in this scenario is natural selection is the differential survival and reproduction of individuals due to large beaks.
Wait, but that's not part of the theory.
That is natural selection.
That is not the theory of natural selection.
It is, because you said you wanted something very specific to this context.
To large beaks. Okay, but then you're about to. This is going to be a bit. Okay, we'll do it, and you'll see what will happen. Okay. So natural selection, differential survival of reproduction to differences in phenotype. You want me to write what? You're modifying the theory. Okay. What do you want me to write?
Right here, Titan says, use my definition. He says, organisms that are more adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on genes that aid in this. That kind of seems like the same functional definition. I mean, do you see a difference between what Titan is saying?
This seems like a more. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me. At the end of the day, this definition, no theory that you're going to be able to get from a source is going to be able to help you to know whether the shiny beaks are being selected for or whether they're just right along.
So, because you have to use logic.
What?
You have to use logic. You have to think about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm showing you that this thing called the theory of natural selection is useless. You have to actually go and do experiments and think about it. Go operate in your background information.
Do you think that chemistry is useless because it won't tell us how Well, it will tell us how
It's
one
useless.
molecule interacts
Is
with another
chemistry a
molecule, but
theory?
you have to know both molecules.
Is chemistry a theory?
Well, yeah, like certain aspects of chemistry would be theory,
No, I'm
yes.
asking: is chemistry itself, as you've presented it as being useful or useless, is it a theory? I'm saying here's what I'm saying. Here's my specific theories. Explain that help you explain things, right? I
Yes.
want to know if the shiny beak participates in the explanation for a trait moving the fixation as a result of it being fit or not fit. Okay, and
Yeah,
so
so valence bond theory is a theory in chemistry that like the number of valence electrons determine the kind of bond structures that a molecule is capable of making. So that's the theory. Okay? Now, if I were to just copy and paste that theory, it would not be helpful at all. If we were to look at two molecules, tell me how the theory helps me determine how that happens. Well, I would say you need to know how many valence electrons one has and how many valence
wait, could you
electrons the
repeat the
other
theory
has.
one more time? Could you repeat it for me one more time? What's this? What's the name of the theory?
Valence bond theory.
What is okay? So what is it? What does the theory explain?
Chemistry. All chemical reactions, basically.
That I don't know what that means.
Okay, so when two molecules interact
Okay.
chemically, they will form or break bonds. The number of bonds or the types of bonds that they form, whether or not one is donating an electron or taking an electron, how those two molecules interact with each other is going to be determined by, at least in part, by the number of their valence electrons. So you have to know this one's got 4, this one's got 2, and then you can understand how they interact. The same way you need to know the environment and the phenotypic population, and then you can know how they're going to interact by natural selection theory.
Okay. So does valence electron theory? I mean, I'm aware of what valence is. I know what, like, I understand covalent ionic metallic bonds and sharing versus giving away and taking electrons. I understand all of this. Um, so the question is, if we're wondering, right? Well, what will happen if we have oxygen, carbon, which has broadly an oxidation number of 4? I just got it back. Let's say oxygen, which has an oxidation number of 2, and we have 2 hydrogens, which each have an oxidation number of 1, right? Um, can the theory help us with respect to how many bonds will be formed?
Yes.
Okay, so it's useful in that case, right?
Yes.
Okay, so now natural selection is supposed to be a mechanism or theory that can pick out the traits that are either deleterious or having to do with fitness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ignores the traits that are right alongs. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so then I'm wondering, right, if shiny beaks, if that's right along or a trait of fitness. Okay, and if this doesn't help us, or anything that you can copy paste from any source, right, doesn't help us, that means that when we determine whether some trait is fit or not, it's independent of the theory. And so if we've established fit and unfit traits, and we were able to differentiate between ride-alongs and traits of interest, then independent of the theory, then to me, what is the theory even doing?
I mean, it's explaining the mechanism by which these things happen. Like, it's explaining the mechanism by which the phenotype, like the large beak, it is explaining the mechanism by which that phenotype creates a differential fitness effect. The explanation for why that phenotype would have a differential fitness effect to another phenotype is explained by natural selection.
Can natural selection differentiate between selection for and selection of?
Mm, yeah, I mean, I would think so.
All
But
right. So can it differentiate between whether the shiny beak is the ride along and the large beak is actually the trait of interest?
yeah, so if the shiny beak has no interaction with any of the environmental variables that you've laid out, so like the warm climate doesn't interact with the shiny beak, the brown nuts don't interact with like the shininess of the beak does not impact any of those interactions with the environment, then selection would not be for a shiny beak. If the shiny beak is increasing in allelic frequency over time, it would just be a byproduct of another like trait that would just be genetic drift. It would not be subject to a natural selection.
Okay, I have not gotten everything that you said. So I asked if natural selection can differentiate between spandrels and traits of interest. You said yes, right? That means there's something in the theory that can differentiate between spandrels and traits of interest, right?
Yeah, if the traits of interest are affecting fitness versus if the spandrels are not having an effect on fitness, then natural selection would be for the traits that are affecting fitness.
No, but okay. Well, how do you understand my question? I might not be clear in what I'm saying. How do you understand my question?
Like the differential, how do you know if something is being selected for, or if it's
No,
just
I'm
a
not. I'm
random?
saying I'm not asking that. I'm asking if natural selection can itself, as a theory,
Yeah,
differentiate between selection for and selection of. Is that how you understood it?
yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay. So that means that if I take two traits that, and I'm wondering whether they're selection for and selection of, whether they're
Yeah.
selection for, selection of, that the theory that whatever theory you copy and paste, right, can tell me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would.
Okay. So then Darwin goes to the Galapagos. He notices that the beak that is shiny and the large beak, they're the same beak, but now wonders which one is being selected for. Is there anything in the theory that can appeal to differentiate them without running an experiment?
Well, like the key here, you can see like the word due to differences in phenotype, there is a differential rate of survival and reproduction. So that differentiated rate of survival and reproduction has to be due to the difference in phenotype. So in order to suss out a causative relationship like that, you need an experiment at that point because
Okay, so no. So the theory cannot help Darwin. He has to do the work himself to figure out which one's being selected for and selected of.
um to a degree, I mean, if you already understand the environment beforehand, then and you understand what the selection pressures are, then you don't necessarily need to do an experiment to rule out that like certain
Right. But all
phenotypes.
those would involve prior observations, and that's kind of what I mean by running an experiment. We observe and we collect data, and then we
Well,
generalize.
all theories are ultimately based on prior observations because that's what we talked about is that theories are made theories because they're reified by experiment and empirical evidence in the first place.
But it
So
seems like
all theories are
you're
dependent on that.
conceding. It seems like you're conceding that in a case, if you're new to an environment, right, and you see a trait, okay, and you have done no observations of the surrounding ecology, with exception to the trait that you're observing, and you see two aspects of that trait, the shininess and the largeness of that trait, okay, natural selection is of no help to you to know which one is being selected for and which one's being mere selected, and that's the criticism.
But I think it is. I mean, if something is if something is increasing in allelic frequency, like a trait is increasing in frequency, like the shiny beak, and you want to determine whether or not that trait is increasing in frequency because of natural selection, I think you can totally do that.
I'm not saying, does the theory have the right content to be able to disambiguate the shiny, the beak with the large beak and the shiny beak?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but give me the paste and copy and paste
It's
that
the
theory.
effect on their fitness. That's what it.
Give me the theory that can disambiguate those. Copy paste it from any source.
It's right there. Differential
This
survival
says
and
nothing
reproduction.
about beaks. This says nothing about beaks. I'm wondering if
Okay, well,
shiny
you're
beak or
being
large
very
beak.
silly at this point, I think, because like it's obviously not going to be bringing up shiny beaks. That's the example you made up. I don't know why you're asking me for.
No, there is this real example. The beaks of the finches were shiny and they were large, right? Darwin had to know had to know that the large beaks mattered and not the
Okay,
shininess.
so what you're specifically asking for then is a theory of the natural selection of beak shininess. And unless such a specific theory exists, then natural selection cannot be useful in determining the fitness effects of shiny beaks. I feel
Natural
like that is a
selection as a
ridiculous
unified
position.
theory. Yes. As a unified theory, it's impotent.
I feel like that is a very silly and ridiculous position to
Well,
hold.
then you're going to have to respond. If natural selection can't differentiate between selection for and selection of as a theory between any traits, right?
But
Then
it can,
it's
though.
in trouble. It's in
But
trouble.
it can, though, because the traits have a fitness effect or they don't.
Then what's the content? Then you're appealing to content. You understand that if it can differentiate between co-referring terms like the term the shiny beak and the term the large beak, if it can differentiate between those terms, that means it's got content about beaks, right? If you can't differentiate between terms, then it doesn't have the right content.
No, I don't. I disagree that there's any content involved.
Okay, then it can't differentiate between co-referring terms.
No, I mean the content is emergent from the interaction with the environment.
No, I'm talking about propositional content. You understand to distinguish between descriptions, you need propositional content.
No, I don't understand that.
Okay, so look, the point is that take the breeder example. Okay, the breeder breeds finches. At the end of the the F generation, the
wait. Let's use a different example. Okay, not a breeder. Let's just use an example of like a building.
Well, you know what I'm trying to explain.
If I built a 7-story building.
Oh, there's a cockroach.
It's fine.
There's a cockroach. Let me deal with it before I.
Okay.
Got him. Wait, not really. Oh my! I wounded him. All right. So no, but my example. Okay, I don't want to appeal to an example then because if the examples are just confusing, I don't want to do that. And if you think the breeder example is confusing,
well, I just wanted a propositional content that has no mind involved at all.
That's impossible.
That's what I wanted an example.
Propositional content is basically language, right? That's what propositional content is in this context, right? So the idea is that if I can tell the difference between the beak, okay, like think about this. Think about the example of Superman. Okay, someone punched Superman. Okay, no. A big boulder landed on Superman. Let's just think of something like that. Okay, and it causes Superman to fall. Okay, the boulder can't differentiate between Clark Kent and Superman. It's indifferent. It's blind, right? And so it will be true that the boulder caused Superman to fall. It will be just as well true the boulderman caused Clark Kent to fall, right? So there are co-referring descriptions, right? The boulder can't tell the difference between Superman and Clark Kent. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if someone from the Daily Planet punched Clark Kent, okay, then it's not. The point is that he's trying to punch Clark Kent. He doesn't know if it's Superman. And if someone said, you punched Superman, he'd be like, no, I was going for Clark Kent, not Superman, right? So there you have propositional content because there's propositional content in desires. I desire to punch Clark Kent. If I had known that Clark Kent and Superman were equal, then I would have never tried to punch Clark Kent, right? The point is that minds have desires have propositional content to disambiguate between the thing that is Clark Kent and the thing that is Superman, right? And so natural selection is supposed to differentiate between something that's being selected for and just merely selected, right? And that in order to differentiate the shiny beak and the large beak, right? It's got to have propositional content in the theory, although albeit not a mind, in the theory to be able to disambiguate between those two co-referring terms. And it doesn't.
So, well, I think it does. And let me know if you think this doesn't make sense, why it doesn't make sense. But natural selection can only select for things that have fitness effects. So that tells me that's what you're asking for to me. I mean, that answers the question to me. It is picking like what it's selecting for versus what it's just selecting of based on fitness effects. It's only all the things it's selecting for have positive fitness effects.
Okay,
all the things that are just ride-alongs can have any kind of fitness effects.
I'm not getting the response. Let me just. I think the part of the problem is that when I appeal to propositional content, I don't know if I'm being clear about what I'm saying here. Let's go back to the Daily Planet. The reporter punches Clark Kent, and you ask him, "Did you mean to punch Superman?" And he says, "I desired to punch."
Okay, the reason I'm not getting this is because all of your examples include people. I want an example of propositional content that is a blind process.
Sure.
But because
Yeah.
the only example you've given is a blind process
The
that
only
has no
other
proposition.
example that I'm aware of are laws.
Like, what do you
Laws.
mean?
Oops.
What do you mean? Like, what kind of laws?
So suppose there's a law out there that there's a law of selection saying that for any bird, if it has a large beak, then that is going to be a trait that the environment is going to be selecting for.
Okay.
Right? That's a law.
Yeah. Okay.
That has no mind. Right?
Yeah.
But natural selection doesn't have anything like that. It has no access to.
Oh, that is natural selection. What you described.
There's a law then that for every bird, every bird that has a large beak, that's being selected for.
For a certain environment, yes.
No, for
So,
all it's a law. Do you know what a law is?
Here we go. Here we go. Here's the real root of it. Is that the laws that you're asking for are environmentally dependent.
Do you know
There
what a law is?
can be no law that is independent of environment.
Do you know what a law is that's differentiated from just a truth?
What, it's universality or something?
Yes. The laws are universal. That in every because the point is that if we specify in every environment there's a large beak that's being
I would
selected for.
disagree with it. Okay, look, it is universal in every single environment of this type. This will always be the result.
Okay, just to
And
clarify your. Go ahead. Did you finish?
so every law is not universal in the sense that it has no prerequisite conditions. The laws of gravity do have prerequisites like mass. Okay, so like there are like things that you need to stipulate for a law to work.
Okay.
Laws are not universal in any context. Like they are still context dependent. You like.
Yeah, but they cover localities. They cover multiple localities, right? And if you
Yeah.
specify in one locality this is true, it's a
Okay,
law.
so if every single locality was the same environment, it would be a law.
No, not even true. Because there are going to be truths. Like, for instance, there's no gold with a diameter of a mile, no lump of gold with a diameter of a mile, but that's not a law, right? It's physically possible for there to be a lumps of gold with over a diameter. Okay. Now, so just even if it were the case that there were no planets or nothing on Earth that had a lump of gold with a diameter of a mile, doesn't mean that it's impossible. Laws describe possibility and impossibility, right?
Yeah, but we already went over how it's logically impossible. Like we already went over this in regards with natural selection, right? We already went over if you had like these environmental conditions, and like you didn't like you already admitted that it was logically impossible for you to not have natural selection with a
Well,
given
but that
set of
cuts against
environmental
your
conditions.
view, right? The point is that natural selection is supposed to be a discovered scientific truth. If it was logically true, then I mean, it can't be scientific in nature.
But you were just talking about how the laws are that way.
No law, not scientific laws. Laws could be falsified.
Yeah, and so can natural selection.
Well, then it's not a logical truth.
So, okay, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you're confusing me with your philosophical terms because I feel like it can be a logical truth.
Well,
And
look, logical truths are typically taken to be necessarily true. And if it's something that's necessarily true, it can't be falsified because there's no context where it's false. But scientific truths are not logical truths because there are contexts where in principle it could be false, and you see if you're in that context, and if you're not, then you verified the truth, right?
okay, so true things are not falsifiable.
No, logically, things that are true, that are necessarily true, are not falsifiable. Yeah, but things that are contingently true are in principle falsifiable, especially with respect to the natural world.
No, I don't know. I mean,
Okay, but I think that's a side thing.
because anything that's logically true is still contingent upon your logical axioms, right?
Contingent just means could have had a different truth value. So if it's something, if there's some truth that depends on a logical truth, it wouldn't be contingent by that definition. So in logic, contingent, I understand colloquially, contingent means
So then
depend on.
it's dependent on the environment then. Like natural selection is just dependent on the environment.
Okay, yeah, but all I'm trying to say is
Like in the
that
same way that logic is dependent on your axioms. Once you've given an axiom, so you've given a certain set of environmental conditions, then the effects of natural selection on the population are going to be stipulated by natural selection. Like A then B.
okay, I've lost sight of what we're discussing. Whether this is Fodor's main point. Fodor's main point is what I have on the screen essentially. I'm wondering if in this ecology I have a large beak and a shiny beak. Is something about the theory of natural selection as presented that can distinguish between the shiny beak and large beak? And you're saying there is in the environment, right?
Fitness, yes.
Okay, but the environment is not synonymous with natural selection.
Yeah, no, it's not. Natural selection is how the environment interacts with the population. The interaction between those two things.
Okay, so I hesitate. I really try to hesitate using these terms, but I think I have to bring them out to get the point across. Okay, so the problem is that natural selection is intentional with an S, meaning that when you have a truth about natural selection, if you substitute a co-referring term with it doesn't necessarily preserve truth value. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. But for intentional causation, you need propositional content to be able to disambiguate between co-referring terms. But natural selection has no propositional content of any particular phenotypic or ecological variable. And that is the issue.
Wouldn't fitness be that?
What?
Wouldn't fitness be that?
No. Do you want to? I think what I was trying to explain is what does it mean to have the right propositional content to be able to disambiguate between co-referring terms?
Yeah, fitness.
No. Look,
I don't understand why that's not a good answer.
Because look, if I'm choosing between A or B, okay, to know whether I'm choosing A rather than B, there has to be something in the propositional content to say A and not B.
Yes, fitness.
Fitness doesn't tell you anything about A or B.
That's what I don't get. Why not?
Okay, think about this. Were you trying to punch Superman or Clark Kent? If the guy said, I was just trying to punch, right? Does that answer the question?
No. But if he says I was trying to punch Clark Kent, it does.
Sorry, say that again?
If he answers your question and says he's trying to punch Clark Kent and he doesn't know about
Why is that true? It's true because his desire has propositional content. The desire, I want to punch Clark Kent. It's explicit. But nothing in natural selection is explicit to any kind of variable.
Because it's not a mind.
But you can have laws that are explicit.
How?
I gave you an example of law. If I say
all those are dependent on mind. None of those can exist without
laws. Mind. Do you think laws depend on minds?
Yes.
All right.
How do you have a law without a mind? It doesn't make sense.
Okay, then. I mean, that's controversial. I don't agree with you.
I don't understand how that makes sense. I mean, maybe I'm just an idiot. I'm not understanding it. But again, I'm not. Okay. I'm not really.
It's not going to matter either way.
It's not my forte. But in my opinion, a law is just a description of reality. It's not a real thing, and the description can only exist within a mind.
Okay, so you could be right about that. I don't think it's going to matter too much, but there's good. The point is that if you're giving up on laws and minds as then or you're giving up on propositional content, right?
Yes, absolutely. I would not say propositional content is real.
But you need propositional content to be able to disambiguate between co-referring terms of traits.
Why?
That's the problem.
But why?
Because
I would say natural selection is doing that without any propositional content.
No, it can't, because it's intentional causation with an S.
Well, there's no intent about it.
And intentional with an S, not a T, right? Intentional. I'll put it in the screen. So it's going to be spelled
Maybe I'm just not aware of this distinction then.
Intentional. Okay.
Okay.
So the point is that natural selection is intentional. If it's not intentional, then it's blind to selection for and selection of. That's the problem. But natural selection can't be blind to those things.
So intentional is incapable of explanation solely in terms of the set of objects to which it is applicable.
Yeah,
I'm still not really understanding what that even means. But
so the idea is that an intentional context is where you can substitute co-referring terms and it doesn't necessarily produce preserve truth value. Okay, so
it's still over my head.
So here's a simple example, right? An intentional context is one in which if Lois Lane believes that Superman can fly, if you substitute a co-referring term, Clark Kent there, it doesn't preserve truth value. So it's intentional with an S. Okay. In the same way, natural selection acts on the large beak, not the shiny beak.
Yes.
Right. And so it will suddenly make it false that if natural selection acts on the large beak, if you substitute large beak for shiny beak, suddenly becomes false. But notice that the large beak and the shiny beak are co-referring just like Superman and Clark Kent. They're the same beak.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're not throwing away intentional causation.
Yeah, but like fitness is the whole explanation for this. Okay. I don't understand why fitness, because look, the shiny beak doesn't have any fitness impact. The large beak does have a fitness impact, and that's why the large beak is what's being selected for and not the shiny beak. Why does
I think I agree with that, but I'm not so sure how that's the response.
But to me, that is 100% answering what you're asking.
Okay. What do you think? I'm coming. Like, how do you understand me? I could repeat myself, but what do you think I'm saying with this? In propositional content, mumbo jumbo, intentional, all this stuff. What do you think I'm saying?
Well, you were talking about being able to differentiate between Clark Kent and Superman when like they're the same individual,
right?
But like the selection for was for Clark Kent and not for Superman,
right?
So in this case, the large beak and the shiny beak are referring to the different like aspects of the same beak, but one of them has a fitness impact and one of them doesn't. So the natural selection is selecting for the one with the fitness impact.
Okay, so
also Grignard said in the comments, and I think Grignard's quite knowledgeable on this stuff. He knows more about philosophy than I do. So he said he can go over this with me if he wants. He said the argument is directed at a naive conception of natural selection.
I'm adopting.
Does that mean anything to you?
I mean, I'm adopting your notion of natural selection. You posted the theory on there. That's the one I'm critical of. Okay. Person A punches Clark Kent. All right. So the point is that that this is going to be extensional, right? So that means that if you substitute co-referring terms, so this will also will be true necessarily that person A punches Superman, right? And that's true necessarily because Superman equals Clark Kent. Okay, here it doesn't matter whether it's going to be true no matter what co-referring term you substitute. We agree with that?
Okay.
So now when we look at an intentional case, right? So we ask, Lois Lane believes that Clark Kent was punched. Okay. Believes. Okay. It's not necessarily true that Lois Lane believes that Superman was punched.
Yes.
So you see the difference between an extensional context and an intentional context.
Okay.
Okay. So now the question is, why is it that the truth value is preserved here? Okay. And it comes down to this propositional content thing, is that Lois Lane, I
think that this is perfectly analogous to natural selection. So if we could just type this out again.
Okay. With natural
selection, just like below this. So natural selection selects
Okay.
bird A.
Selects large beak.
No,
Galapagos.
bird A. Bird A.
Bird A. Okay.
Just go
We'll see
on
where you're going.
and you can change it if you think it doesn't.
Okay,
fit.
that's fine. That's fine.
Select
Okay.
bird A. It will be necessarily true that natural selection chooses bird A's beak and all of the properties of that beak.
Okay, but what are the co-referring terms? So you're saying, well, let's write it out. Be true necessarily that natural selection. What is it that you wanted me to write?
So that natural selection selects, and you can just list out both terms. You can list out large beak and shiny beak.
What's in the parentheses here? Bird A is equal to what?
All of its properties. So large beak and shiny beak.
Bird A is just
bird A has a large and a shiny beak.
Okay, bird A is the bird with large beak. Okay,
bird with the shiny beak and the large.
Okay, let's say a large beak bird. Okay, so
and shiny beak bird. It's both.
Okay. Oops, that was.
So yes, natural selection is selecting bird A, and we're trying to figure out if it is selecting the shiny beak or the long beak about bird A. What is it actually selecting?
Okay, I'm trying to see the analogy. Did you want to finish this, or let me see? Let me just copy paste this. Okay, what's analogous to? Go ahead.
Yes, now it's natural. Now the next one is natural selection. Let's see, selects large beak, but it is not necessarily true that natural selection is selecting the shiny beak.
Okay, sorry. I got distracted for like literally 2 seconds. What was it? Natural selection selects bird. What do you want me to write here?
Selects large beak.
Okay, bird with large beak or large beak. Okay, let's just spell large.
Yeah,
beak.
it's just large beak. That's because that's the actual allelic frequency that it's selecting.
Right, large beak is the shiny beak, right? And then
yes, but it's not true that natural selection is selecting shiny.
Right, this selects the shiny beak. Okay, will be true necessarily.
I think and it's not necessarily true.
Like right. Okay.
In mirroring the lowest lane.
Right. Not true. Okay.
There was nothing in the parentheses in the lowest lane one. It was not necessarily true that natural selection is like.
Oh, the parentheses here is Superman is just Clark Kent.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. So great. So
now we're on the same page.
Yeah. So natural selection is intentional, like in the case of a mind. Well,
I don't necessarily
because look, in existential cases, right? When we talk about cause and effect, like if an avalanche, rock slide causes an avalanche, right? There's going to be, we can talk about co-referring terms, right? The white stuff, the shiny white stuff falling is the avalanche, right? Doesn't matter what co-referring description. We could put every co-referring description for the avalanche. It's just going to be true that the avalanche is causing the whatever co-referring description because the rock slide is blind to the descriptions.
Yeah. So the same case as the natural selection selects bird A.
But not in this case, right? Natural selection is not blind here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because natural selection is not blind. It can only see what has fitness impacts. It cannot see anything that doesn't have fitness impacts.
Okay, and this is what Fodor is saying. Okay, for an entity to see different co-referring descriptions, this is where you need propositional content. You have Lois Lane has propositional content. She has beliefs, which are propositional content. Okay, the only, according to Fodor, I know you disagree with him on this part. He says the only non-mental thing that that can have propositional content are laws.
To me, the fitness effects are the propositional content. Maybe I'm just not understanding enough about propositional content, and I don't understand why that statement is logically incoherent. But to me, the fitness effects are what is informing the propositional content.
Okay, so if we take the breeder case, okay, so breeder has a. Sorry, I'm losing my mind. Breeder, I believe golden hair is good for my breeding business. Okay, so that you understand that.
Yes, this is exactly analogous.
Okay,
to natural selection.
Right. So then we see F20 generation. We see the golden hair.
No, that's not the analogous. So do natural selection, and then in quotations, large beak is good for fitness.
Wait, where in natural selection do you get that?
Because like natural selection is all about the
because there are localities where large beaks are not good for fitness.
Yes, because it's dependent on the environment.
All right, so there's not a fact of the matter as to whether generally.
Okay, wait a minute. It's the same for the breeder, dude. The golden hair is only good for the breeding business in certain conditions.
Which is precisely why there's no such thing as breeder theory.
Yeah, so okay. Like there's not a
theory of breeding, right?
I mean, I think that there is.
No, in terms of what kind of hair is desirable.
It's a breeding business, right? So it would fit the theory of supply and demand, right?
Yeah, but that no longer.
Why wouldn't that be analogous? Because the theory of supply and demand is dictating why something is good for your business.
The point is that there's not a theory about whether golden hair is good.
But there is a theory of supply and demand that you do.
But what does that have to do with whether golden hair is desirable?
Because now that you apply it to context, you apply the theory of supply and demand into the context of a breeding business. Now that theory allows you to determine whether or not golden hair is good or not. In the same way that when you apply natural selection into a context of an environment and a population, it will allow you to determine which phenotypic properties, which allele frequencies will be fitness beneficial or not.
Okay, so what is it that you're responding to exactly? You're saying, first of all, the first thing I heard is that this is not analogous.
No. Like the natural selection is analogous to like I believe golden hair is good for my breeding business. Natural selection would say, the large beak is good for fitness.
Okay, give me a source for that.
Where's your source that golden hair is good for breeding business?
I can just ask the breeder.
And where's their source? They need a source.
They're just saying that they want golden hair.
No, they need a source for that.
Wait, what do you mean? Look, I'm confused.
Like for them to say that golden hair is good for the breeding business, they're relying on theory to determine that.
No, they don't even have to do that. All he has to say is that when customers come on in the past, they've chosen golden hair, golden retriever.
That's based on previous observations, just like fitness effect is.
Okay, but the point is that he didn't appeal to a theory.
Well, yeah, he did. He applied to what was good for his business.
What?
That is demand. He's applying
are you talking about a scientific theory?
Well, he's appealing to previous demand. The theory of supply and demand.
No. The theory of supply and demand doesn't tell you whether people in, let's say, Mongolia want golden hair for their puppies.
And it's still a theory, right? Exactly.
No, so it's exactly. Not. I think this is confused. Look, the point is that the breeder is not utilizing a scientific theory for
but they are.
What?
It's the law or supply and demand.
How does the supply demand tell you whether golden hair is better for his business than white hair?
Because if it's good for his business, it has to be like the supply and demand has to work out for it to be good.
Does the supply and demand explicitly tell him whether it's golden hair or white hair that he should go for?
Yes.
There's no content. Look, okay, this is the third time this has happened, and I think I don't understand when you're deriving a conclusion. When I say that it's not propositionally supported, it's not logically implied from the theory. That's what I mean, right? There's nothing logically about supply and demand that tells you golden hair. Go with golden hair, not white hair.
Yes, there is.
Okay, then I don't think you. I think you and I mean something different.
Okay, so golden hair and white hair have different amounts of consumer demand.
You and I mean something different by logic, right? Like, so for instance, I am a bachelor. What can you imply? What's logically implied from this?
You're single.
No, it's I am wearing a red shirt. It's to you.
No, it's not logically implied by that.
Logically implied. Okay. So how about this? Fit traits tend to survive. I'm sorry, I'm losing it. Okay. What's logically implied by this? If I were to say big beaks survive, is that logically implied? Organisms with beaks, big beaks. No. Right? Supply and demand.
Again, it's dependent on the context.
Right, but the point is that big beaks survive is not logically implied from this statement. Just like this is not logically implied from this statement.
Yeah, because you're not providing enough context to make it logically implied.
But do you understand what I mean by logical implication? You look at the meanings of the terms and see what you can derive. Right? So if you take supply and demand, I'm going to copy paste it right here. Okay. So here it is. It's going to be kind of long, but I'm going to zoom out a little bit because I don't know if I got, oh my goodness. Okay. Let me make it shorter. But if I copy paste, okay. I'm sorry. I should have used Microsoft Word. Okay. Supply and demand. Okay. Here we go. So if we just share my screen again, reshare my screen, I'm just going to share the wiki. Okay. So here's supply and demand. Okay. Okay, so is there anything here that has any logical implication on golden fur versus white fur? No, nothing in here, based on the terms that are being used, will logically infer that golden hair is better than white hair.
I think you have a very silly conception of what is logically inferred in theory.
Wait, no, it's the same, right? Because if we go back to my
no, I don't think. I think it's very weird you're saying unless it's explicitly stated in the theory, then it's not logically entailed by the theory.
Exactly. Yes. And by the way, what I'm saying is not.
No, that's what I think is silly, though. That's what I think is silly.
I'm letting you know. I'm just letting you know that I will tell you when I've told you before that most people disagree with me on this and all the, on the natural selection stuff, the mind stuff. But I'm telling you what you've just said.
Okay, wait. So if we talk about a law of addition, and I say, what do I get when I add 2?
When I add 2,
nothing is logically entailed. Nothing can be logically entailed.
When I add 2 to what?
Exactly. I have not provided enough context for anything to be logically entailed.
It's not even a proposition.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying you're doing.
But there's the proposition. Look, there is a proposition. Golden fur is better than white fur. That's a proposition.
No. That's not even a proposition.
It is a proposition. Look, what is a proposition? Wait. No, you don't know what a proposition is.
Let me finish the sentence.
Okay.
You have not provided enough context. You haven't talked about the environment. You cannot make the word like fit. You cannot use that word unless you are referring to a specific environment. It's like if I said that ant is tall, you would have to then ask tall relative to what? I have not provided enough context in my claim. So you need to provide enough context by necessitating what kind of environment you're talking about.
I agree, which is why that means that there is no laws about those kinds of placeholders.
Yeah, because you can't have a law that X is good because it's only good in a certain environment.
You can't have a law. I mean, I don't believe there are any, but there could be a law saying that,
okay, I'm saying you could, but I'm saying like it's meaningless. It doesn't matter. Like you need to provide the context. Like, and that's what I think the disconnect is like for the theory of supply and demand, for example, you need to provide the context that golden hair has more consumer demand than white hair. And without that context, then your theory of supply and demand is completely useless. You cannot use it to make an actual like useful claim about what's good for your business. But if you have the necessary context that white hair has less demand than golden hair, then you can use the theory of supply and demand to make a useful statement that golden hair is good for your breeding business. In the same exact way that if you have the environmental aspects of like these are the selection pressures, and then you know which phenotypic characteristics are going to be most fit for those pressures. You have to have the context, and then you can use the theory to
The
make.
claim was actually much simpler. It was just that golden hair is in demand. Is that deduced from the law, the supply of any theory?
Well, you have to know. You have to like. Well, maybe because it just depends on what you mean by demand. But again, like that was actually not the claim. The claim was that it was good for business.
Yeah, it's in demand.
Well, no. Hold on, because those are two different things.
It's just saying
In
look,
order
when
for
it's
you to
good for
get from
business.
one to
Look,
the other, you
well,
have
then
to
look,
have
all
them
I
all.
meant by that is when it's good for business. All I meant was that people want.
Oh, wait a minute.
Golden hair.
Wait a minute. That's not logically entailed now, is it? Because in
That's
order
what I
for that
mean.
to be
So it is
logically
what.
entailed, you need the theory of supply and demand.
Wait, what's our disagreement? All I'm telling you what I meant by the statement. When I say it's good for business, all I meant is that the breeder knows that people want golden hair. That's all I meant. Nothing special. Now the question is, how does he know that? Does he know that based on any theory? No, he just experienced
So
stuff.
that's the same thing for fitness.
Okay, but that means
So
that
if you're saying that golden hair is more in demand and that's why it's better for business, I'm saying golden hair is more fit, and that's why natural selection selects for it. That's exactly
that's
analogous.
not but what do you think that the demand case is supposed to illustrate? It's supposed to illustrate that the way he knows that golden hair is in demand rather than white fur, not because of a theory.
Okay.
So in the same way that we can know what traits are fit or not fit, but not because of a theory.
You know which traits are fit or not fit, but not because of a theory. In the same way that you know what is in demand and not in demand, not based on a theory.
Theory of demand. Exactly.
But in order to know how the demand relates to the business and the supply and everything, then you do need the theory, right? So in order to know
Maybe. I
how
don't know
the
much about
fitness,
it.
wait, so let me complete this thought.
Mhm.
In order to know how the fitness effects of these traits will impact the allelic frequencies over time, you need the theory of natural selection.
I'm not so sure. I would have to think about it, but I think what I'm trying to say is that if the theory of natural selection doesn't even get us to what traits are in demand, so to speak, right, or fit,
But yeah,
then
right.
I
It
think it
just
fails off
tells
the
us
bat.
all it does is once we have that information, it tells us how the population will change over time. In the same way that the theory of supply and demand does not tell us which products will be more in demand,
Okay,
but
so
it
you
does tell us
agree?
once we know which is more in demand, it does tell us what will be better for business, and it does give us actual information based on that. So if we know which traits have more fitness effects, then we have information that natural selection can tell us about how the allelic frequencies will change over time because of that. So
So we do agree that natural selection cannot initially identify which traits are being selected for and which traits are not.
I don't know. I don't think I'm willing to
Because
agree with
that's the
it.
criticism, right? And the criticism is that if it can't do that, that at the same time it's intentional, right? In the way that it can pick out traits that are being selected for, and when you substitute the co-referring term, it doesn't preserve truth value. In other words, you're on one. It seems like what's being said is that on one hand, natural selection is blind in that it can't tell, it can't differentiate between selection for and selection of. But on the other hand, when we talk about these statements that natural selection acts on the beak that's big and not on the beak that's shiny, right? To me, these are contradictory
Yeah,
views
because I never ever said the first one.
of the
I've
first
only
one.
been claiming that it can differentiate. And I'm saying that it can differentiate based on fitness.
Sorry, you never said the first what?
The
Never
first
one?
claim. You said the
That
first
that
claim
you
was that
never so you've never thought that natural selection can differentiate between co-referring terms.
no, I'm saying it can differentiate
Okay.
between the four
Well,
and just selecting up.
well, but then if it
And I'm saying
can,
that it differentiates based on fitness.
okay. So here's how this is why I'm puzzled. Darwin went to the Galapagos. He has natural selection as a theory with, right? It's not okay. So he has the hypothesis.
Okay.
Okay. And then if you're saying that it can differentiate between selection for and selection of, then that means that when he looks at a trait, he can fall back on the hypothesis to test, whether, or the theory or whatever,
Yeah.
to test what, but it doesn't tell him whether the large beak or the small beak, or sorry, large beak or the shiny beak is being selected for.
Yes, it does.
Logically infer. Do you know? Okay, I think another thing that we need to go over is I don't think you know what it means to say that something's logically entailed.
I think we already went over that, didn't we? And
Yeah,
I
but
agreed with everything that you said was logically entailed.
okay, but if there are no placeholders for beaks or anything of the type of beak, then you can't logically infer anything about beaks from the theory.
I think you can. I don't know why you say otherwise.
Okay. I don't understand. I don't know how
I
to
think that
express
we
it.
are kind of digging some bedrock here. We've been going on for almost 3.5 hours at this point, and I will say I don't feel frustrated, but I do feel very tired.
Yeah, I'm tired too. But I'll end on this that I think if we were to continue this discussion, I think you and I have something different in mind when we mean logically entailed. Maybe we should explore that a little bit.
I feel like I don't know how I could be having a different kind of conception of what logical entailment means.
Well, if I have a let's say here's okay. So suppose you're doing the stock market and I say well, my advice to you is you follow this principle. Buy low and sell high
Uh-huh.
to make money, right? Do you think that logically entails buying any specific stock?
No.
Okay. So in the same way, if natural selection is saying favorable traits or traits that are conducive to fitness will, all things being equal, move to fixation, does that tell you about any particular trait?
No, obviously not.
Not. So then when I asked if it's the shiny beak or the large beak being selected for, you're saying that natural selection that you can logically infer from natural selection to that specific trait, but that undermines the claim that you just said that natural selection, there's nothing logically implied in terms of any specific traits, just like there's nothing logically implied by the buy low and sell high, no specific stocks to buy. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't see any. I don't see what the discrepancy is between those things. So I'll leave it out with your example, right? So you're saying buy low, sell high. Now you present to me two stocks, one of which has we have some kind of quantifiable variable, and like this one has an indicator that it's very low, and this one has an indicator that it's not very low. Now all of a sudden, I know which stock to buy. I'm going to buy the one that's low.
Okay, so but this is the interesting thing.
No, but now I'm going to say with natural selection, now natural selection has two traits. One has a very high fitness and one has a very low fitness, quantified. Then we know, based on natural selection, which trait is going to be selected for. Because we know the fitness.
And this be my last word, and then I'll give you the last word. My last word to what you just said. The principle is buy low, sell high.
Yep.
And you've come to two different types of stocks, right? Two stocks. And you've come to know which stock to buy, right? Which one is the good stock to buy. Notice that you did not use the principle to do that.
What do you mean? I figured out which one was lower, and I used the principle buy low.
Oh, yeah, but maybe I misunderstood you. I thought for some reason I processed in my mind that, because in stocks, you want to buying low sort of implies that you would expect it to go up, and there's reasons to think that it will go up rather
That's
than
why I
down.
said, like, you quantify it as like a way, like a number that tells you which stock is lower. Like,
okay, so let's just use an example. So right now, a stock that's really low that I used to buy, I no longer buy, is Upstart. It's AI lending, and
okay,
their stock used to be $400. Okay, now their stock is $10.
yeah.
$15.
I'm
Right?
just saying that you attribute a fitness to each stock.
Okay, so now you tell me, okay, Danny, what you should do in your stock adventures is buy low and sell high. Now I look at Upstart, this stock that used to be 400 and now is 15. And I'm wondering, first of all, should I buy Upstart? Well, if I should buy it, if I know that it's low and it's going to go high, right? But how do I know that it's in fact low and it's going to go high rather than just keep on going lower down to a penny stock, right?
Yeah, I
In
would
other
say
words,
it's
how
an
do I
outside
know?
variable.
Because for all I know, this is the high point, right? And I'm buying high and then it's going to go down and I'm going to end up selling low and lose money, right?
Yeah, I don't think any of this is pertinent because I'm just saying, for sake of argument, you can attribute a number that tells you which one is lower.
So what
It
do you
doesn't matter
say
how you're doing it. It doesn't matter the specifics. For the sake of the argument, you have a number. This one's 2. This one's 4. And buy low, sell high tells you every single time buy 2, not 4, because it's lower.
Wait. Okay, maybe the analogy I was using
It
is
doesn't
that,
matter what the number is. It doesn't matter.
yeah, but these are not different stocks, right? This is one particular stock, right? So
No. These are 2 different stocks.
no, that doesn't make no look. When you're trying to make money on stocks, you look at one particular stock, right? And you want to buy low and sell high.
I'm saying there are 2 stocks. You don't know which one to buy. I'm saying I tell you the principle: buy low, sell high, and you have 2 stocks that you're trying to analyze, and you determine one of them is lower than the other.
No, you're misunderstanding the principle. But I don't. The thing is that you're supposed to buy for any particular stock, one particular stock.
Buy it when it is low,
and then sell it when it is high. You're not talking about two different
I think
stocks.
you're misunderstanding here. I'm saying that the number that you're quantifying is quantifying which one is lower, as in which one is at the lower point.
It's one stock.
Huh?
Wait, we're talking about one stock.
No, we're talking about 2 stocks.
The principle is that for any given stock, buy it low and sell it high.
Danny, please. 2 stocks for this scenario.
That's not the principle.
No. Come on, man. I'm saying for this, just please follow me with this. 2 stocks. You're trying to determine which stock should I buy.
What does that have to do with the principle?
Stock A or stock B. Okay? And I tell you the principle.
Okay.
Buy stock when it's low and sell it when it's high. Now, I need to determine between these 2 stocks, which stock is lower.
No, that's not
its own individual cycle. No, for its own individual cycle. If one of them is at a market high and it's trading way above its fundamentals.
Okay, yeah.
And the other stock is trading way below their fundamentals and they're at a 52-week low, I can know between those 2 stocks which one is lower.
All right. So I take back my claim. You did understand it. I just don't know why you're including a second stock.
Because, man, there's 2 traits.
No,
there's 2 alleles.
You don't know. The whole question. No. There's 2 properties, right? The point is,
2 properties.
So take the large beak. It's either that it's selected for or it's just mere selection, right? It's one trait, right? So you can think of one stock as either it's low, you should buy it, or you shouldn't buy it in the sense that it's right now.
There are 2 traits. There's the largeness of the beak and there's the shininess of the beak. Those are 2 traits.
Yeah, but for any given trait, it's either selected for or it's not.
Sure.
Okay, so in the same way for any particular stock, you either
buy it or you don't.
When you buy it, you should buy it, sell it when it goes higher.
Yeah. You can only buy one stock, just like you can only select for the one trait.
Now the thing is that when I've determined that this is the stock that I should buy because it is at a low, right? I didn't utilize the principle.
What do you mean you didn't use it? You didn't use it.
I didn't use the principle buy low, sell high to know that this, in fact, is a stock that I should buy and sell later. That has the property of low, in other words.
The only reason that you knew to buy low is because of the principle.
No.
If I didn't tell you buy low and sell high, you don't know which stock to buy.
No, that's not true. Well, you don't know when to sell, perhaps, but
No. I said buy low, sell high. So I gave you information about buying and selling.
no, but
And
you
so
did not give
if you don't know
information.
which stock to buy and you have no principle to guide you, it
No,
doesn't.
the principle doesn't guide as to what stocks are low and what stocks are high.
I agree.
It tells you when to sell.
No, it tells you when to buy.
Okay, or when buy or sell.
Yes,
Yeah, sorry.
exactly. That's the whole point. So natural selection doesn't tell you like
What traits are fit?
Yeah, it tells you which traits will be selected for. And the ones that are selected for are the most fit, just like the stocks you buy are the lowest ones.
No, the analogous property here is what stocks are low and what stocks are not low. That's analogous to being selected for and selected enough.
No. What that is analogous to is which traits are fit and which traits are not fit. Which stocks are low and which stocks are not low. And the buying is analogous to the selecting.
Okay, so you're saying that when we're looking at a stock, if it's at a low, then that's analogous to it being
a highly fit.
It's fit, right?
Yes.
All right. Okay. And okay, that's fine. Okay, that.
And the principle is buy low, just like natural selection is select the most fit.
Okay, so then how do we know? Do we use natural selection to know whether a trait is conducive to fitness or not?
No.
That's Frodo's argument, right? I'm confused.
Well, okay, like he's saying that it for some reason it wouldn't be helpful to tell you to buy low.
Natural selection is this mechanism that picks out the selection for traits and ignores and is blind. It's not blind to selection for and selection up.
But it's all based on fitness. Just like which stock you should buy is all based on the price, if it's high or low.
Well, look, I guess maybe I've lost the point. I didn't mean for the analogy to convolute, because if there's no purpose of my analogy if it just confuses me and confuses how I'm seeing our disagreement. So I'm going to drop the analogy. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was just analogous. I'm not so sure anymore. But I appreciate your time, and perhaps we can talk about it later. And I have maybe I could just formalize the argument a little bit more and maybe write about it a little bit, so that way you can, rather than maybe if it's on text, you can know exactly that is what I
think. Well, I definitely understand your argument more than when we came into this, so we are making progress here. I did enjoy the discussion. I don't think that it was like a fruitless discussion that didn't go anywhere. I do think I understand your positions a lot better now, and you have actually challenged me on my positions and made me kind of think about my own positions here. So I'm going to need to do some thought as well. So
before I go, can I say something? The reagent Detroyer agrees with me, reagent. So I don't know why you shouldn't. If you want him up here, he's just going to support the claim, right? Detroyer is one of the philosophy bros around these parts.
Okay, yeah, I don't know Detroyer, so
yeah, he's a friend of mine, but he actually agrees with me on yeah. Okay. But yeah, I mean, all in all, I think biologists are doing great. I don't think they need natural selection as this theory. I don't really think Darwin discovered very much. I know that's what we were disagreeing about. I don't want to be critical of biologists. I think they're doing great work, and I think there's a lot to learn from them. This is just a philosophical dispute for me. I don't mean to undermine the body of knowledge that they've come to. So don't mean to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, hey, we had like a 3.5 hour discussion about this. I think that we covered a lot of good ground, and I think that we did have a very intellectual and like stimulating conversation. So I got a lot to think about.
And you've helped me because part of it's sure hard to communicate, and so I always look for ways to try to communicate, and this has definitely helped. So thank you.
Yeah, well, just because I'm trying to really actually understand you, I want to understand your arguments, so that always helps with communicating when the other person actually wants to try to communicate and not just like have a shout.
Grayson, I think you do understand me, and I think that what's interesting is that I think there was a point, and I don't remember if I don't know, my memory is hazy now, but there was a point where you agreed that, yeah, you need propositional content to disambiguate between co-referring terms. And you're saying that natural selection has that content. If that's true, then I think you've overcome the objection. And I think that that's a kind of recognition of what's needed here, is that the NS has got to have the propositional content to be able to disambiguate between co-referring terms, if you also believe that it's an intentional form of causation, so with an S. But yeah, for real, I'm gonna go. You can talk to your chat for a second. Thanks for having me on. Okay.
All right. Hey, thanks, Danny. It was
Yeah.
awesome. You guys check out Danny, Phil Talks. I don't know if you're mainly on TikTok, not on YouTube.
Yeah,
Right?
don't worry. I'm a nobody. Y'all have a great night.
Okay.
Bye.
Peace out, Danny. Good talking with you. All right, everyone. Have a good night.